Come back to order for our Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting here in La Junta. Mr. DeWalt, you and your team are up, I think.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Director, Commissioners. My name is Reed DeWald. I'm the Assistant Director for Wildlife and Natural Resources, and this is an exciting day for my branch and many others. It's kind of neat to be doing these workshops again and to have the opportunity to discuss in detail a few of the things that we do and that we take so much pride in. Today we're going to have a much more informal discussion. The Chair and I have talked, and this is going to be hopefully an open discussion, a kind of a back and forth, a learning environment. You'll see before you there's a bunch of hands-on things that we brought, skulls and radio collars and all kinds of things. And the intent of that is to touch those and kind of get a feel for things. And there's other things the biologists have brought today for you to look at, and to hopefully this is just a much more interactive hands-on workshop. I would be remiss if the representation that you got here was that this was only a terrestrial or my branch's undertaking. I want to make sure that it's known by the Commission that big game management and CPW is an all-agency undertaking. we're getting feedback here. And so this is an all-agency undertaking. You'll see we have Regional Manager Romatsky from the Northwest region here on the panel as well. Corey Chick is here from licensing. And what we're representing here is just the very tip of the iceberg. There's so many people that are involved in big game management throughout this agency, from our frontline customer service reps who take countless phone calls throughout the year about licensing questions and bears in people's yards and all kinds of questions. You name it, they will get it. To our frontline DWMs and technicians that have those biological degrees as well, and they have 4-year degrees, most of them, and they're operating as frontline biologists, as well as my staff here who are by title field biologists, and a lot of these folks have masters or even in some cases PhDs in the field of wildlife biology. And one thing as well that I think you guys have gotten a sense for, but these folks have committed their lives to this, and this is what they do. There's such a sense of pride and professionalism, and I think you'll see that come through today as well. So I'm not going to speak a whole lot today, thankfully, but Regional Manager Romatsky and myself are going to present an update on the West Slope Mule Deer strategy to you, kind of a leftover from yesterday, and then we'll get into the big game workshop as well. So with that, I think we'll go into the update on the mule deer strategy.
Thanks, Reed. Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Chairman, Director Prenslow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Nice to see everybody this morning. We've got the slide up. That's great. JT Romatsky, Northwest Regional Manager. I'm going to start out this morning igniting some conversations, which I think will lead in really nicely to today's discussion about big game management. I get to talk about our most iconic deer species, whitetail. I'm just kidding. Mule deer. And so really quickly, the West Slope Mule Deer strategy came about in around 2014. It's a commission adopted strategy for us to really be tasked with looking at the 7 major priorities of mule deer management on the West Slope. And so that's a little bit of a background. And so why we did it, obviously they are an iconic species here in the state of Colorado. There's also a major economic aspect from managing and making sure that we're paying attention to these species. The other thing that I would say is it's also an indicator species. It's one of those species across multiple landscapes that we really have to pay attention to, because it really is providing us with insight, excuse me, as to how functional those habitats are and how things are doing on the landscape. I'll tell you, I'll start out a little bit, this won't do it justice, but over the course of time, mule deer on the western part of the United States has been in pretty dramatic decline. Here in Colorado from 2006, we had around 600,000 mule deer in the state of Colorado. Shortly thereafter, in 2013, those numbers were around 380 to 390,000. That's pretty dramatic. And it's not just Colorado. These were states all over the western United States. It's a west-wide issue. There's groups like WAFLA that formed a mule deer working committee, and everybody around the western U.S. has been tasked with looking and trying to identify what is the issue, what's going on. And there's nobody at this table or anywhere in the western United States that will point to one individual aspect or anything on the landscape that probably is challenging these species. But that said, that was those numbers and our constituencies, our communities, everybody really did look at us to take the lead on what's going on, how are we going to fix this. The West Slope Mule Deer strategy really started out as an opportunity for us as an agency to really start looking at what's going on, what we think is happening, and then to take it out to the communities, to the ranchers, to the agriculture industry, to sportsmen and women, to everybody, to help them inform us of what their thoughts and ideas were on this issue. So we'll get into this a lot today, I'm sure, but Colorado took the lead on this, which isn't rare. We do that all the time. We have some of the best research and biologists, and I'll tell you, as far as mule deer are concerned, we have some of the most robust data and research and monitoring and management programs of anybody in the United States. Our goal with this program, if I can switch to the next slide. Our goal with this program really was to engage the public and understand their perspective. And as we did that, we wanted to engage the public. We had the first meeting we held in April of 2013, we had 100 employees of this agency get together in Montrose. It was a pretty fascinating meeting at the time. 100 of us sitting around the room, just really openly throwing things at the wall and what's going on with mule deer and what we think and how can we change things. We came up with about 10 different principles or issues or concepts that we thought we could work on, and then from there we took it out to the public. We hired Keystone Consultants and facilitated 7 meetings around the state of Colorado. We had a final meeting in Glenwood Springs later in 2014 where we came up with the public. It was significant. There was probably 80 to 100 people just alone at that meeting in Glenwood Springs. And at that meeting, we came up with essentially kind of a draft strategy on how we're going to manage mule deer, what those issues that we should be focusing on are, and then it was brought to the commission and later adopted by you guys. So I'm gonna stop there and let Reed go through some of the updates on this, and really for Reed and I to be up here, this is, as I said, to kind of reinvigorate this discussion about the West Slope Mule Deer strategy, where we're at, and I think it's really important that we tell our story, that there is some follow through on these kind of things. We're putting a lot of effort, time, money, other things into this, and so this is an opportunity for us to really get back out in front of the public and say this is what we've done in 5 years, and this is what we intend to do as we move forward into the future. So I'll turn it over to Assistant Director DeWalt and let him go from there, and then we'll jump back up.
Thank you, JT. So, as JT mentioned, we came up with 7 main strategy goals here, and you'll see on the slide before you that those are the 7. And I'll briefly talk about each one and kind of give an update as to where we are, and then after that discussion, Region Manager Romatsky will engage you in a discussion of where we might want to go in the future. And at any time, if there's questions, feel free to ask, or I can provide more detail. So the first strategy is the landscape scale habitat management to improve habitat quality. And to date, we've completed 29 projects on the habitat management projects, and we've treated close to 20,000 acres. During this time, we focused our work on 4 priority landscapes on the western slope, one being the Bears Ear or Blue Mountain area, also known as D2 and D6. We focused in the White River, which is D7, the Roan Creek Logan Mountain area, which is D41, Middle Park, which is D9, and then we've also worked in the Uncompadre Plateau and the Pagosa Springs area. So what's neat about this as well is these habitat projects do cost quite a bit of money, and to date we've spent about $870,000 on with mule deer strategy funds. But what we've seen is these funds have been leveraged about 3 times, and we've spent close to $3 million with partners and the funding outside partners provide as well. So we've invested that $800,000 or close to $900,000 so far, but we see that return, that threefold return, which is really a neat story as well, that others are jumping into this and working on these habitat management, quality improvement projects that we have going as well. So future planning before the initial 5 years is up is we've planned for another about 12,000 acres of habitat work, and we've allocated close to $780,000 of mule deer strategy funds, and then we're seeing about another $700,000 of partner funds coming in so far. And then we know that the BLM is doing NEPA clearances on close to an additional 10,000 acres of area that we can manage as well or do projects in. So folks often ask, well, what are these projects? So this slide here before you are some of the ways that we do these habitat management treatments. And so some of the project types, or our primary project types in the strategy so far, have been winter range shrub seeding and restoration, mechanical tree and shrub removal, and that's what you see sort of on the right side, my right side of the slide. Those are two different machines that do mechanical shrub and tree removal. And if you've never been on one of those projects, it'd be recommended that you go see the power and size of those machines. On the left, you'll see prescribed fire, and that's what our prescribed fires look like. I think a lot of folks will see these big mass fires on the news that are ravaging our forests, but when we do a prescribed fire, it comes in and burns that understory on really a controlled manner and kind of marches through the forest and clears space up for new habitat. You also see aerial seeding of wildland fires. When a fire does come through, we'll come back and aerial seed that fire and get that regeneration. And then we'll also do some agricultural enhancement seeding, and then we do a lot of monitoring on these projects to make sure what we're doing is effective. The second management goal that we had, or strategic priority, was predator management, where predation may be limiting deer survival. And I think all of you are familiar with the ongoing research projects in the Piceance and Arkansas River basins, both areas where our data showed that predators were having impacts on, at least at some scale, impacts on our mule deer survival. We're also continuing to work on updating our statewide mountain lion management plan. That is something this commission will see in the coming year or soon. And then, as you guys know, we continue to look at our bear license numbers and increasing those. And those are all priorities within this mule deer strategy. The fourth, the third part of the strategic priorities were protecting habitat and mitigating development impacts. And this is something that we continue to do at the local level through our land use planning efforts. And then we do at a larger scale with the Forest Service and BLM planning processes as well. We also continue to see the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Protection Program, also known as RFP, that you guys are so involved with, that we see that continues to provide a robust habitat protection program for our mule deer using Habitat Stamp, GOCO, and other partner funding sources. Those projects that you see before you throughout the year, most have a mule deer component in them, and mule deer are a priority in those projects. So the fourth strategic priority was the reduction of impacts of highways on mule deer survival, their movement, and migration. This slide up on the screen now is actually of the Highway 9 project that I think everybody is very familiar with, and these are actual photos off the project, and I think it's neat to see that it's working. And so I didn't have it available yet, but I will be sending out to the commission a 3-year project update on that project, so you can see the effectiveness in like a 4-page version. It's a governor level review of the project, but I'll give you some of the highlights from that 3-year progress report. So to date, from when that project has started, we've seen 45,000 successful mule deer crossings since that project was put into place from 2015 to 2018. And we've seen an overall success crossing rate of 97%, which is pretty neat. What we've seen is an overall increase of 17% success from animals that were crossing before and having vehicle collisions to now they're crossing successfully and not being impacted. So this project is working. It's a major investment, but it's really showing that the Highway 9 project is working. And I'll definitely send you that report, and it'll be available for public review as well as to the 3-year project update. But I think you'll see some more in-depth reporting there, and you'll see the success of that. And it's just a great story. Some of the other things that we've done to work on this, the impacts of highways on our mule deer herds. Some of you are familiar with the Colorado Wildlife Transportation Alliance, and in the 2017 Alliance, the Wildlife and Transportation Summit that was in Silverthorne, and it was really the first meeting of its kind in Colorado, where we got everybody who was interested in highway crossings and the successful movement of wildlife across highways in the same room, and there's really been a lot of energy since that meeting. We've seen the creation of the Alliance Steering Committee, and there's members in the audience that are on that committee and multiple members of our staff, and they get together and they're really looking at how highways impact mule deer and elk crossings and other wildlife crossings and what can be done about that. And I think you'll see a lot of important information and work come out of there. And JT can definitely update more if there's questions on that. And then the last thing that we've seen out of that alliance is a West Slope prioritization study. A lot of times we look at these crossings and like, well, where should we put the next one? And there's a lot of good information because you see animals being hit by vehicles and think we should have a crossing there. And what this study did was put together the collar information we have, the impact data that CDOT has, and has really started to prioritize where the next crossings should be. And you should be able to see that soon. And it's kind of the future is where we go with highway crossings.
Reed,
Sure.
did the one down around the Ute reservations, didn't we have a project underway down around Durango?
Yes, and that I was getting ready to talk about that one as well. So it's great segue. So there's been questions like, well, where's CPW at? It's similar to what you're asking, and what are we doing in the crossings financially? And to date, we've allocated about $1 million towards crossing projects. These projects take a lot of time to plan and to put together, just like any large-scale highway project would. And so we have allocated $1 million in regions, CDOT regions 1, 3, and 5. So the region 1 is the GAP project, and although it's not West Slope projects, it's the gap between Denver and Castle Rock and the Springs that many of you drive through. And so we've contributed money to that project, and you've seen some of that in the press lately. Region 3, it would be the continuation of this Highway 9 project and some expansion of that, and we've contributed money to that as well. And then the Region 5 is the project you're asking about, Chairman, and that is on Highway 160 between Pagosa and Bayfield, or Pagosa and Durango, and we've contributed substantial money to actual crossing projects in that area as well.
I'm not going to recognize folks. I don't think we need that. So you guys can, I'll stop you if you start talking over each other.
Reed, I know it's not critical now, but on the Crazy French Ranch, the border of Colorado, New Mexico, the New Mexico Department of Transportation has already started that fence from Raton up the hill. And I don't know what their timeline is, but when it ends at the border, it's going to be a massacre area on the Colorado side. So that's something to have in the plan long-term, because I don't know how long New Mexico is going to take to build it, but they've made pretty good headway through Raton.
Yeah, that's a great point. And during our tour of the Fisher's Peak property the other day, we went down there after our meeting and looked at it, and they're getting close. So I think we'll continue to prioritize those type of projects, and probably that one as well. It ties into a different discussion that we can have, but it's this migration discussion that's occurring both westwide and more nationally with Secretarial Order 3362. We're deep into that discussion as well, and we're starting to prioritize where these migration corridors are and starting to do more mapping, and that would be kind of an obvious one too that we would want to work on.
And as a follow-up to that, I know we've talked a lot about trying to make sure we coordinate with the New Mexico Game and Fish folks as CPW. Do you know if New Mexico Game and Fish is working with New Mexico DOT? And I mean, obviously we don't want to be telling other states what to do, but as JT said, we often take lead on a lot of these things and it benefits what we find successful and what we find doesn't work. Sharing that information across state boundaries, of course, is something we can do.
Yeah, definitely. And the communication that we have with New Mexico is at least monthly, if not weekly, on these type of things. Folks at similar levels talk, and I was on the phone with New Mexico last week, not specific to this, but specific to migration corridors, and we do have those type of discussions. So I don't know what their conversations have been with their DOT, but I'm sure they're deeply involved in those discussions.
So this project, Highway 9, we've talked a little bit about this before, but I think that's almost all Tudor Jones, isn't it? Highway 9, Blue Valley Ranch.
Yeah.
And so is there a different approach when we're dealing, I don't know if the 160 is another private landowner, but is it a different approach, both funding and just from a policy standpoint, private versus public land? And these deer that are crossing there, they're going to heaven. I mean, you know, I'd cross over there too if I could go to Blue Valley. So that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Oh, certainly. And so, say the 160 project that you referenced, that's with the tribe down there that we're working as well. So that's a different opportunity or different conversation. The success of Highway 9 had to do a lot with that private land partnership as well. So yeah, certainly each project brings its own opportunities and challenges. So they're all a little bit different. One thing that we're finding as well with a lot of these crossing projects is it's great to do these, but if there's no protections on the land on either side,
Right.
you can have a bridge to nowhere or a crossing to nowhere if those lands aren't protected. So each one of these brings a different challenge or opportunity. So it's a great point.
Or are we seeking out the private landowners for deals like this, I hope?
Yeah, we certainly are. And this one would not have been
Abnormal.
accomplished without Blue Valley Ranch. I mean, they're the major funder and partner of this one. So, yeah.
Just as a reminder, if you recall, when we were talking about the RFP priorities for the car, we made sure that highway crossings was a priority. So if we get applications that include that, we're going to have to ask committee. So I know that's one way, but there's several ways too.
The uniqueness of this Highway 9 project as well with Blue Valley Ranch was so unique that that ranch and the owners were the landowner of the year at the OFWA, the American Fish and Wildlife Association. So they were like a national landowner of the year recognized for their work on this project. So very unusual, but we're very happy to see it happen.
Reed, could you comment on the lead time for one of those projects? That's the thing that always amazes me, the number of years DOT needs.
JT, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can talk. Do I need to be on the mic or are we good? So, you know, the steering committee that we have that's working with CDOT, you know, that's one of the things that continually comes up is that, you know, the federal transportation funding that comes to the Department of Transportation is already in planning processes for years and years out, you know, and so we're talking about $1 million overpass for deer and elk and everything else. They're talking about $10 to $40 million a mile for some of these road construction projects. So the planning and one of our priorities is to start getting ahead of that. So Highway 13 is obviously a major priority for me in the Northwest region. You know, when we're speculating conservatively that we're losing somewhere around 2% of the deer, That's significant on Highway 13. And so that one in particular, the planning right now that's occurring, we're embedded into that. We're already identifying, using the prioritization study that Reed talked about, we're identifying those areas that are really critically important for us to get crossings, overpasses, or underpasses. And now we're starting to talk about, okay, so if we were going to do that, to the point made earlier, is that who owns that land? How are we going to secure that land? And so we're talking, I don't want to say decades, but this is at least 5 years out minimum before we can start getting some of the dollars in place, some of the conservation easements or known obligations for land and those kind of things. So it's a long-term process.
I might add that, obviously, we're talking about wildlife today, but Highway 13's in my old backyard, and I probably know, and Marie could tell you this too, 10 families that have lost family members from rolling in their car and dying on that highway. So part of it, obviously, is for deer and elk crossings, but this is a human safety, and that's really what Highway 9's about too. So the 10 that I know of, I would venture there's a lot more that humans that have lost lives on Highway 13 because of deer or elk.
All right. No other questions, but we're happy to take more. But I think you'll see these crossings, there's a lot of interest in this, probably something we should have been doing years ago, but we're doing them now, and I think it's a great thing. They take millions and millions, if not billions of dollars to accomplish, but we're involved in this discussion with CDOT, and it's a great partnership going forward. So there's a lot of things being done to reduce the impacts of highways, but there's always more that could be done as well. So to continue on with the
Thank you. So can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between CPW and CDOT? So like how frequently do you meet? What does that relationship look like?
Sure,
And also just wanted to add for everyone, if we can please use the microphones. It's an accessibility issue for those who may have hearing issues. Thank you.
Yeah, I can take that, Commissioner Adams. So the steering committee that's been put together between us and the Department of Transportation, they're meeting about monthly. The big coordination that we've been working with is the consultants that are putting together the prioritization study over the last about 2 years now. And that was a heavy lift just to get all of our data from research or collaring projects back over to the consultants so that we could identify that along with the locations of collisions and other things. So that was one of their primary focuses because, it kind of goes down to, are you willing to spend multiple millions of dollars on something without that assurance that that really is the right place to do that? So that was their main focus, but now they're starting to talk more about, okay, so now what? How do we start going after other grants? How do we match things? What are we going to do? And so I've got 2 staff on that. They're meeting probably, monthly, but they're having weekly calls.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
So just to move towards closing this discussion up and moving into other ones, the 5th strategic priority we outlined in the West Slope Mule Deer strategy was to reduce the impacts of human recreation on mule deer. And we continue to partner, similar to the land use discussion, at local levels with counties and municipalities. And then there's this ongoing planning with the Forest Service and the BLM. You had a presentation from Chuck Anderson yesterday. It was more specific to elk, but that is a result of this as well, as we used elk as the species, but a lot of the things we learned in that recreation study obviously can be tied to mule deer as well. So although not targeted directly towards mule deer, we're going to use some of the findings and the results of that study to educate ourselves more on that issue. And then one thing I think that has come out of this, and JT reminded me of this yesterday, is we're really seeing some new relationships with the recreation folks or the recreation advocates, whether it's hikers or mountain bikers, whoever. And he's right in the middle of that in some of these areas. It's a great new relationship and a conversation that didn't exist before. And I think we're really seeing the benefits of that discussion as well. The sixth thing has to do more with the management of our deer herds, and we can talk more about this later, but it's the regulation of doe harvest and the provision of youth opportunity. And in the plan itself, these are the things that it said we would focus on. And so we would manage our doe harvest conservatively in units that were well below the population objective. We'd provide enhanced hunting opportunities for youth, particularly in herds that are at or above the population objective. And then we would evaluate the deer stalking rate and herd performance relative to habitat capacity. It's not new work, but there's a new or renewed focus on this within the planning of our licenses and just our habitat management as well. So the strategy has really brought that forward. And then the last strategic priority was to maintain a strong ungulate population and disease monitoring program and conduct applied research to improve management of the deer populations. Last year, this commission had a conversation and actually approved the CWD management plan that was in direct relation to this as well. We were looking at disease that was affecting our deer herds, and we said CWD is the #1 priority, ties back to this mule deer strategy. And then we continue to conduct ongoing disease surveillance with our field managers and our staff veterinarians. If we see something that's sick out there, we will bring that animal in for necropsy, and we're learning a lot through that as well. So disease management is an ongoing thing in the agency as well. So with that, JT will come up and kind of wrap things up as to where we may be headed, and then we will move into the big game management workshop.
Thanks, Reed. JT Romansky, Northwest Regional Manager. Again, just to wrap this up, and I won't take too much of the time, but, you know, me getting this job about a year and a half ago, one of the things that kind of sparked my interest immediately is that whole tell your story thing, is the relevancy, is the credibility of us as an agency with our constituents. And I think so the next steps from my perspective on this, and obviously the leadership team and with Director Prenslow's leadership also, you know, we're going to have some conversations, but we've got a lot of places to go and a lot of things to do. And I think the first thing we need to do is actually analyze what we have done and actually speak to it. And so this today was a start for that. And I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, coming up with some of the analysis and actually talking about habitat. You know, if you talk to people, everybody knows or thinks they know what Utah is doing, but do you really know what Colorado's doing? We're doing an awful lot, but we don't get out, we don't actually wrap our heads around what that story is and how much money and time and effort and all those partnerships. And to Reed's point earlier, you know, we're talking about the habitat work that's been done with about $800,000 and matching that 3 times over, but that also doesn't take into consideration the work that BLM and some of our other partners are doing, HPP, one of our other programs. And so as we start to look at this and start to map this and look at a landscape scale, I think that's a really important factor of our analysis. And so I'll wrap this up by saying my direction to my staff and our priorities revolve around the West Slope mule deer strategy, but also what I want to do is look at the funding, look at how we're spending our money, the cost benefit factors of that, and what we're missing. Are we actually meeting some of these goals? So I'll leave it with that. There may be questions. I hope this is a nice tie-in to the rest of the conversation, and we'll look forward to the rest of the day. I think this is a great opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call names. Commissioner Zimmerman.
Somebody needs to facilitate the conversation.
JT, you mentioned briefly talking about getting our story out, and we touched on that a number of times. This, you know, the mule deer story is so interesting to everyone, recreation users, wildlife watchers, hunters. I know our PIO and outreach folks are, of course, working as hard as they can, but if there's anything we can do to help support that messaging, that storytelling.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's got to be a priority for us.
Commissioner Adams.
So since this is a learning workshop, I mean, somebody get on me. That's what I would get out on y'all. So.
We don't have to get on you because you always do it too.
Finger I point at you is threw back at me. Okay, so I've appreciated our start. I'm curious if we could just take a step back and reflect on what our intended outcomes for our learnings today. in this afternoon, like, what do you want us to walk away with? And, I just needed a little bit more, like, context before we dive into the animal-specific content.
That's a great question.
If you wouldn't mind.
Commissioner Adams. I'll take a stab at that, and Reed can help me out as well. So contextually, I mean, what we're trying to get out is, there's a lot of new commissioners, and so one, just to understand what this West Slope mule deer strategy is and why we did it, and the declines in mule deer, and why this is such a critically important aspect of our everyday work. So that's the first and foremost thing. In coming up with this strategy and the 7 main factors of what this strategy really wanted our staff to focus on, we wanted to summarize that. We haven't done that. We did this 5 years ago, and we've been out there just chugging along doing work, and nobody's just said, where are we at? Are we doing good? Are we meeting some of those goals? Are we failing on some of the areas? And so this is a start for Assistant Director DeWalt and I to take the lead back again and bring it to you guys and the public to summarize where we're at, where we're wanting to go. And so that really is I think, my synopsis of why we're here today.
So are we only talking about mule deer today?
No way. We're going to talk
Okay,
about
so
everything.
I just meant like the whole day. So that's helpful for this section. And I think one of the things that I've been struggling with is the difference between our strategic plan and implementation plan, because I don't know any of the metrics or measures that you're using. So I don't know, you know what I mean? Like I've heard conversations around there's been a decline or an increase or this, but I don't know where we started. I don't know what the trends are. So I look forward to hearing some of that information as the workshop goes on.
Yeah, agreed. I'm gonna bring up Assistant Director DeWalt, and he can talk more broadly about today's stuff and probably get to some of those operational goals as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, JT, before you leave, can I follow up a little bit on the mule deer? Just
Please.
2 quick questions. I think when we talked a lot, or you chatted with us about Highway 9 before, there was I don't know, I wouldn't call it a conflict, but a question about who's paying for the overpasses between CDOT and CPW, perhaps others. Is there a accepted policy about that yet as to how the division of, financial responsibility comes for wildlife crossings?
There's not a policy. The steering committee's been really good about acknowledging the fact that this is a goal for both CDOT and CPW. Either agency is more than happy to try and find funding or come to the table with those kind of things. Highway 9, our agency put in about $10,000. And if it weren't for private landowners and local communities coming together with money along with CDOT, that project never would have happened. Financial times are different, and we're looking at different ways to try and identify these places and actually build some of these. So I think moving into the future, I don't know that we'll have a policy, and we're really thankful right now to have the relationship we do with CDOT, where they're not looking at us to be the provider of the financial aspect of these overpasses. We've got a really good relationship, and we need to work on that and continue to work with landowners and other groups to try and find ways to do it. Does that help?
It does. And then, for some of the critical crossing areas where we have a lot of conflict, does CDOT ever adjust, for example, as a temporary solution, the speed limit for critical areas where there's crossings, until a wildlife crossing can be built? The area between, for example, Sedalia and Larkspur, there's probably at least 1 mule deer hit there a week, if not more. And it's always along the same gullies, but the speed limit for that entire stretch is 50. And just wondering why they wouldn't take certain gullies it wouldn't be us, CDOT, and say it's going to be 35 for the next quarter mile or a half mile, until we can, come to a longer-term solution. And I'm just giving that as an example, and I think that's probably not as critical as some of the other areas you all have been speaking about today.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point you're making. There's 100 different things, flashing signs to speed limits to straightening bends in roads and slowing down traffic, to the high fence and just to channel animals to straighter portions of roads. So people are toying and playing with all these things all over the U.S. and ultimately the best thing you can have is an overpass, but everybody's still trying all these different aspects of to ameliorate some of those issues.
Commissioner Garcia.
Quick question. So I'm still a freshman commissioner. I've got about 4 months in my freshman year yet. But so I'm learning more and more from the biologists, but I still rely a lot on the guy on the streets, or the guy in the woods, actually. When I looked at this, I thought, well, one thing I hear from them that I don't see is habitat competition. Do we talk about that at all?
You know, interestingly enough, Commissioner Garcia, that was one of our internal staff's top 10 issues, elk competition or other ungulate competition, grazing competition, those kind of things. At the end of the day, it was not ranked as one of the higher aspects of importance here. Part of the reason is, you know, I mean, elk are grazers and deer are browsers, and so, you know, there is some spatial competition, and some of those aspects may come up in the conversation today. But so yeah, that was, it was identified, and then one of those that dropped off. There was also things like climate and weather, you know, and drought, and obviously for us, those were major issues potentially facing mule deer populations around the West. But how are we going to, you know, I mean, we pray, we're doing the best we can to try and help out the mule deer, but, so those were removed probably for those reasons.
Thank you.
What does elk competition mean?
I would use that in the aspect of animals on the landscape, so the number of elk competing with the number of deer for space, for food, for habitat. Yeah.
Commissioner Haskett, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you. On Highway 13, which is really a health and human safety issue with a deer, it's not a deer a week, it's probably 10 a day or more, I don't really know, but they do the speed limit reduction, they do double fines, all kinds of things, and it actually really hasn't helped, I don't think. It's a night crossing, your fines are doubled, speed limit's lowered. I don't know that people actually pay attention to it, unfortunately. I don't know, Luke can probably say the same thing, but it's...
I spent a lot of time driving that at night, and it doesn't seem, enforcement's required in order to have it happen, and there's not a whole lot of troopers up our way.
The one thing I could say about 13, it would be maybe to look at our cash reserves also, because it is a health and human safety issue, and see if we couldn't progress forward on that. I know there's a lot more to it. I've kind of checked into it a lot because so many things have happened in our area to our friends. But the one thing that I've been told by CDOT is they really want to do it when they're doing road construction themselves, because they plan out so far ahead. So if you know an area that's critical, and you check with your regional manager and see, you know, hey, are they going to do something on this road? Because that's the time to do it with them.
Yeah, just to add on to that really quickly, Highway 13 is a fascinating example of this, but so the engineering, the designing of the roads, all those things are going along really well, and we're designing in those overpasses and underpasses where we would like to have them. The actual construction built into phases over time. Some of the construction is happening now, but CDOT's doing it in a way that we actually can come back into those areas later with those priority crossings and put them and install them, so that's a real benefit that we didn't have, you know, happening before.
JT, can I, Highway 82 was also a corridor of carnage this spring. It was unbelievable. I mean,
Yeah.
a dozen each morning. I mean, I for the first time ever, I saw two right next to each other who'd clearly been hit exactly at the same time. So I guess my question is a little bit to piggyback on some of this conversation. I mean, how are those decisions made, and, you know, to do deer fencing? I mean, we're seeing all of it from Glenwood to Grand Junction and out to the Utah state line, which is great to see some of that happening. But not a lot on Highway 82. There's been a lot of work on 24 down the Arkansas River Valley, so that seems to have made a pretty significant difference. But you also notice where sort of private property lines come in, and I'm just curious about sort of how, maybe it's a little bit to Taisha's question about sort of working with CDOT, and if it's not a state corridor, if it's another jurisdiction of some sort, how do those decisions get made? What are those conversations? How are they prioritized? Maybe it's some of the data that you describe. Can you just talk to us about that sort of process?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. I would say that the decision-making process has changed significantly over the last 2 to 3 years, probably likely because of Highway 9, because of our steering committee, because of some of those things. We're very much embedded into that process now, whereas before, really the triggers for that was CDOT, Colorado State Patrol, and it was a human, incident issue. And so we were not necessarily left out of some of those conversations, but with the planning and processing when they would come to us was more like, hey, where can we put some ramps for those animals to get back out of the fences? So it's changed some, and I feel like we're in a really good place right now. And I think there's some work to do, and the private landowners obviously come into play as well. Up in Eagle, along I-70 with the fence, and we had a long conversation about E16 last year with some of the issues we're facing up there. And likely, we've lost some significant winter habitat for those animals. They can no longer get to those winter ranges north of the interstate. So we're trying to embed some of those conversations. 82 is another priority for us, and that's a tough one to watch up there. There's just so much traffic. There's very little opportunities for actual crossings where we know we have assurances that there won't be houses or something else later on. We've lost so much significant winter range up in that country, and we've bottlenecked those animals. And so we're facing some serious challenges up there. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but it's a great question to ask.
Great. Shall we move on to the...
All right, thank you for that discussion. Commissioner Adams, to go to your question, like, what are we doing here today? So that was a holdover from yesterday.
Oh, that was a holdover from yesterday.
So
Yes,
that could be part of the
Like-
concern here. Yeah. So we do have an agenda for today. Since this is the chair's last meeting, I can help control that agenda a little bit, so you can take some early vacation, I guess. I'll keep this crew on task. You guys being on task, that's not my responsibility. That's the chair's, I think. But Commissioner Bray, I know you were very vital to planning this. Do you want to talk about what you helped us craft this agenda, or what some of your goals were for this workshop?
Okay, thank you. Well, as you recall, the chairman tasked me with trying to organize and put on a big game workshop, and I immediately screamed for help, and here's my team. And I just threw out some broad ideas with Marie's advice. We threw out some broad ideas. This is just one, we hope, of many. We used to have a lot of these workshops. In fact, almost every meeting used to have half a day or something workshops, and I would hope that going forward we can have more. But my goal here was just to introduce the topic. We threw out a big list of things to these guys, and they narrowed it down a little bit just due to time constraints, but to me it's Big Game Management 101. It's just learning definitions, learning what this spreadsheet means, all sorts of things, just trying to bring it in, and as Reed said, highlight the work and the professionalism that this agency does. So my goal was more of just an educational, for me as well, I've been around a long time, but I learned a lot from these guys, and when I first got involved, these things were invaluable to me as a commissioner to make decisions that come before us, and understanding. So that's my goal, is just learn definitions, learn speak the language to start with, and have this dialogue like we just had was fantastic.
Can I just comment on that too? Is I looked back, when I joined the commission, I was a big game hunter, right? And I hadn't been to more than 2 meetings before I realized, yep, you are, but you don't hunt in some of the options. In fact, you don't even hunt in a lot of the options. So the first year, I was just constantly confused. And so part of what, when Robert brought this up, initially months ago, was I'm hoping that it allows a lot of folks that don't necessarily big game hunt or don't do all of the big game hunting, the leftover draw, all the different variations, that it would be faster for you, and I think I'm going to be better prepared today to leave because this may be the day where I finally understand the whole system. But that was kind of my thinking too. So, Commissioner Garcia.
So back to the idea of 101, again, I'm going to take advantage of being a freshman, and the same sort of idea, when I ask Howard questions, he says, he gives me this, right, and says, here it is, right, and so that's what people have. And then I'm in a meeting sitting here yesterday, and we're talking about E18, and I go, where in the hell is E18 on here? It's not, right? And so maybe, one of the starting points for 101 is, because if I'm talking to my friend on the street and in the woods, and I say E18, they go, a who? Because E18 has no correlation to GMU 18.
Right.
And why you folks did this to us, I'm not quite sure. I'm sure it was to confuse us, but maybe today at some point you could help us, help me at least, get through that first hurdle.
Sure. Yep.
Well, we had to prioritize some of these, and that's why I really implore the future chairman to schedule more time for these kinds, because we can't cover everything today, and we had to kind of prioritize, so that's where we're at, so.
We can spend a week.
We just do overlays.
Exactly. And we will answer that question today, Commissioner Garcia. I think Shannon Chower will answer that question for you. At least I hope she does. But that's a perfect example of why we're here today. It's a language that's difficult to speak. I don't even understand it some of the time. And so it's just to help with that discussion, to show you some of the faces of the people that are doing this day to day, and provide the opportunity to just learn and to discuss things. So I just thank you for that opportunity. Mr. Chair, thank you for all your service and for the years of work here and just the friendship as well. And we're going to miss you, but we appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to bring up Craig McLaughlin to kind of talk briefly about how this ties to the strategic plan, and then we'll get rolling from there. One other thing that is not part of my team, but is going to be vital to this discussion as well, is Corey Chick's going to talk about some of the application rates from last year and how the draw worked, and it's some of that discussion you guys were having yesterday as well. So, and as far as the agenda, if we cut off the end, we'll do that another time. So we'll probably keep a parking lot of ideas that we don't get to today, and then we can get to that further down the road, or you can have one-on-one discussions with anybody here or anybody on CPW staff. So with that, I'll bring Craig up to talk about the strategic plan.
Thank you. For the records, I'm Craig McLaughlin, the Terrestrial Section Manager. I thought we might start today's agenda to just review where this big game management program of the state fits in with our strategic plan. I think all of you that have spent some time in the commission recognize that our strategic plan is a roadmap for all that we do in the agency. The big game program that we have in place is exhaustive. I'll tell you that from experience in working with 4 other state fish and wildlife agencies, our big game management is about the most complex that you can come up with. But that complexity brings a lot of value to us, a lot of value to our hunters and a lot of value to our landowners, and I think you're going to see that today. So I just wanted to quickly run through the goals of the strategic plan, remind us that most of what we're going to talk about today is directed at Goal 1, which is conserving wildlife and habitat to ensure healthy, sustainable populations and ecosystems. Some of our specific objectives under this goal are to look at managing sustainable populations of game and non-game species to support fishing, hunting, trapping, and wildlife viewing opportunities. And one of the strategies we use to address that is to develop, implement, and update our species management plans and strategies. So you're going to hear a lot about our herd management plans today, how we implement them, what their components are. We've talked about this a lot to you. Reason for that is it is just really the the grist, the main components of our management of our big game populations. We also hit Objective E under that first goal, which is to conduct research and monitoring to inform our management decisions. We have 3 strategies that address that: producing biological and social science research to improve our knowledge and management of wildlife and our habitats, identify, monitor, and assess the current aquatic and terrestrial wildlife threats, including disease, and maintain robust monitoring to inform species management and planning. All but Goal 2 are encapsulated in the work that we do under our big game management program. We don't, I don't look at Goal 2 as managing our state parks and for world-class outdoor recreation as a major component of that, although you could stretch that. You could say our parks are a place in which we provide camping opportunities for our hunters. But Goal 3, achieving and maintaining financial sustainability, there's no question that our big game program does provide a considerable input into the finances of the agency.
You have a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Before we move on, and I'm not sure if you're going to do this, but one thing that would be extremely helpful, for example, for Goal 1, one of the objectives, as you mentioned, is around managing sustainable populations of game and non-game species. It would be helpful to have a list, a database list, or Excel spreadsheet, whichever format you like, of all of the different game and non-game species. What the current rate is, what the goal is, like what does success look like as far as the management and maintenance. Another example is, so basically I'm just asking for more like comprehensive, because what I'm getting is a lot of, here is the mule management strategy, here is this animal strategies, here's that management, but there's no kind of like what we did with the plans. There's not one document that I can go to that gives me an idea of so that would then inform how you're prioritizing, right? Because I don't know what data points you guys are using to prioritize the mule versus the tail of the other one and all of the things. So this is an area, I will say in full disclosure, where I have the steepest learning curve. And so I feel like I'm getting a lot of micro level information, but I'm not getting enough macro information to see where all of these pieces fit together. So that's where I'm struggling. And I'm not suggesting or asking you to answer that for me, but more so to just let you all and the staff know these are the types of things that I'm really needing information and support around in order to inform smart policy decisions. Thank you.
Good point. No, we don't have all that in one place or even a couple of places. We do have on our website, we do have a listing of our species of special concern we have for our non-game programs. But you will have to dig into our big game management to look on a species-by-species basis for some of our management goals and objectives.
Right. So I'm just wondering if, as we move forward and continue to this is our 101, so I'm fine with that, but as we think about the 201 version, considering compiling that information. And again, I think, I'm coming from the education space, and one of the things I'm struggling with, and a lot of my colleagues is we have too much information. Right? So we are saddled with so many different databases, and people have different pieces of information, and the knowledge management has been something that I have found large, complex agencies like CPW and the many education agencies that I work with across the country are really struggling with. So, I'm not asking for these things from a place of naivete. I understand how complicated and challenging it'll be, but because we have so much information, I feel like we're now at a point where how do we synthesize information and really try and figure out which data point, which piece of information is going to be the most meaningful. So it was really helpful to hear that there is a list of I can't remember if you said game or non-game list. And going back to what I talked about yesterday, if we can please consider, as a commission, updating our commissioner handbook with this information, so there would be like a big game section, and that section would kind of give us like, here are the top priority areas, here are the, measures that we're using, here are the metrics we're trying to achieve in the 2-year implementation cycle, because then that helps us to be able to better monitor and support and ensure that you all have the resources that you need to be successful. Again, not specific to you, Craig, but I'm just saying in general, so that's all.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
to be clear, our strategic plan is an attempt to bring all of that intense information up to a level that's easily digestible. As to, why are we doing what we're doing?
Right,
and-
I understand
and yet
that.
it
I think where I'm coming from again is just needing the measures and the metrics, because having just goals and objectives is not a sufficient amount of data in order, to be able to really, so that's where I'm really excited about what you guys are offering today, and just helping me and, the other new, I'm not going to call myself a freshman. I'm going to call myself like a sub-freshman. I'm in middle school over here. So yeah, and again, this section was only meant to be 5 minutes, so I'm also just curious about that as like a time allocation for the strategic plan alignment. Anywho, all right, continue. I've taken too much time on that. Thank you. Just continue on with your.
So, goal 4 is maintaining dedicated personnel and volunteers, maintaining our force, increasing awareness and trust for CPW. And goal 6 is to connect people with Colorado's outdoors. So all those lesser, we have, to a lesser extent, the big game management program does tie into all those goals. We are going to be looking at a very high level overview of the way in which we manage big game in the state. We're going to go through a look at the concepts here. Shannon's going to come up here in a minute or two and start talking about big game management concepts in our herd management plans, how we implement the plans. Brad Banulis will take that. We'll talk about harvest strategies, and then we'll talk about licensing and the draw in our various hunting seasons. And we've put this together as a broad overview of a very complex program. We certainly welcome your interaction and your questions as we go through this. So with that, Shannon.
Okay, sorry about that. Matt Eckert's actually going to come up and give some definitions and some of the data behind some of the language that we speak as well. So Matt, and then we'll get to Shannon.
Welcome, Matt.
You read, Matt Eckert, Terrestrial Program Supervisor, for the record. This is directly meeting the request from Commissioner Bray to review the spreadsheet that he waived. And for those people listening online, you can find this on the Commission website page under the May meeting materials. And you can follow along with us as we discuss this. So this is that long spreadsheet. I left you a pile of data this morning as you came in. And this is a 7-page summary sheet that you received 3 times already, once in early April, once in preparing for the decisions at the May Commission meeting, and then once for preparing for this workshop. I printed off the 2 sheets that I would like to talk about today. We don't have to talk about all of them, because most of them are structured the same exact way. So if you understand one of them, you understand all of them. The 2 main points, we also gave you a list of acronyms in the mailing, and that's a reference. So just take a look at that. If you hear a buzzword, a 3 or 4 letter word, it's not a bad word. It's an acronym, so just go reference that. Keep that with you as we have more meetings. All right, so the 2 main things that I'd like to talk about first is getting through these spreadsheets, making sure we all understand them. And 2 is talking about whether this is the appropriate level of information that we should be providing to the highest level of the commission, or should we refine this into something more easily to digest, something more like a dashboard, and talk about maybe what you'd like to see in the future. We haven't received feedback on this in years, so we can talk about that now, today. But first, because we were asked to, I'd like to review this first spreadsheet, and this is page 2 for those looking on the internet. This is the first page I gave everyone today. The title is 2019 Big Game License Recommendation Summary by Region and Species. And when I look at this, I see 9 major columns. The first column on the left is both species and region. The second column says all limited/cap licenses. And scrolling to the right, the 9th column says post-hunt. So if I refer to a column number, that's kind of what I'm referring to. I'll also use the titles of those columns. All right, starting all the way on the left, we have broken this down by species. So, and keep in mind, this is in reference to what you're deciding on at the May Commission meeting. So this is deer, elk, pronghorn, moose, and black bear. We break this down by region. We do that because, well, really 2 reasons. One is this is our administrative boundaries by region, but also all 4 regions have major different ecology, different weather and habitat. So it's kind of interesting to see how we break the licenses down according to the regions for that reason too. In the second major column, this is all limited licenses. And by limited, we mean what's going through the draw, and it says /cap. What does that mean? Over the counter with caps. And right now, we only have over the counter with caps for black bears. We added black bear this past year to the spreadsheet, so that's a new title. Within this second major column, we give you last year's information on the total number of licenses made available. All right, so let's take an example. In deer in the Northwest, we had in 2018 hunting season, 37,834 licenses. You guys with me? Okay. In 2019, we had an increase, and you can look at that red number, 2,479. That's how many we increased to the license recommendation. Remember, we were recommending these in May for your approval. So we are recommending 40,313 licenses, and that's a 6.6% increase. All right, the next columns, the major columns, so number 3, which is all rifle license, 4, 5, 6. So that's breaking down the different methods of take. All right, so number 2 is the total number of licenses. Number 3 is breaking it down by all rifle licenses. Commissioner Adams, you with me? She's shaking her head no.
That was great, because I lost you right after 6.6.
Okay. So look to the right, is that major column 3, it says all limited/cap rifle licenses.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all the limited licenses that are assigned to that method of take for rifle.
Can you perhaps explain what limited licenses are?
Yes, so limited licenses are, a hunter will apply for a license. It's limited, so it's not unlimited. So if you go over the counter, the term over the counter, we have unlimited licenses. So a hunter at any point in time within a time frame can go purchase a license. But when you have limited licenses, there's a fixed number, all right, and that's for management purposes. And that's those who are going through the draw, they have to apply for a limited license. And then over the counter with caps is also a limited license. It's a fixed number. The difference between what's limited going through the draw and over the counter with caps, it may be the same exact quota, is how the hunter obtains that license. So the draw, you have to apply for it by a certain date. Over the counter with caps, it was on sale at a certain date, and then you have this first come, first served basis.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm with you.
There will be a test.
I love this. Bring it.
Okay, so,
Bring it, Bray.
all right, let's move to column 3 again. Here's all the rifle licenses. So these are all of the licenses that will go through the draw, plus the over-the-counter with caps for bears. Okay? Column 4 is all rifle female and either sex licenses, so male/female. So that's the title for the column 4. So we break it down so you know the difference in those licenses. If you wanted to know just buck licenses or just bull licenses, you would subtract the difference between 3 and 4. So for example, if you wanted to know the total number of buck licenses in the state, we have 77,405 in column 3, total for 2019. You would subtract the 21,000 from column 4, total in the state for deer, 21,920. That would give you about 55,000 buck licenses. Okay? That's how you can use this data to your advantage. Learn more. Column 5 is all archery licenses.
This is it.
So it's broken down by that method of take. Column 6 is all muzzleloader licenses, broken down by that method of take. Okay? If you look down and you're looking at moose, you may be asking yourself the question of why are we missing data in these columns? And that's a common question. And Danielle explained this 3 different times yesterday, but out of context, it may not be easily grasped. So the way we handle elk licenses, for example, we have a fixed license quota for different methods of take. We have a certain number of licenses for archery, we have a certain number of licenses for muzzleloader, we have a certain number of licenses for rifle. We don't have that for moose. It's the only species that we handle this way. It's the applications that tell us where these methods of take will fall. So after the draw, because a moose hunter will put in for a specific method of take, after the draw, we will know who drew that license for moose. And whatever method of take they've chosen, it'll fall into one of these categories. Okay, but at this time, when you're reviewing this in May, we don't know that information. Okay, black bear. You may be asking yourself, why is there no data in that one column for column 4? And that's because we don't hunt sows or bears in separate licenses. We hunt bears. We're not asking the hunter to determine the sex before they harvest. So there's nothing in that column. It's just broken down by method of take. Okay, ready? Let's go to column 7. And this is post-hunt population. So after the hunt, we're estimating what that population is. And we provide 2 years. So 2017 is an estimate, 2018 estimate, and then our 2019 projection. We don't know what the estimate is. We're projecting it using all of our data, the licenses, allocations, and success rates. We're projecting what that projection will be for population. Column 8 is the population objective range. This is what is included in herd management plans. We're going to get into this later, so don't worry, the details are coming. But for population objective range in column 8 on this sheet, this is a total. All right, so let me put it this way. In herd management plans, we have a range of a minimum and a maximum that we're trying to hit. If we add up all the minimums in herd management plans for the Northwest region for deer, we get 227,700 animals. If we add up all the maximum in that range of each herd management plan in the Northwest for deer, we get 249,600 licenses, or animals, sorry. We're not animals. And the target is where we're targeting. So this is column 8. You following me?
No, hold on, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh,
It says
okay.
population objective range. Okay. Any questions on that?
How does the population objective range, shouldn't that be what our post-hunt populations are if we did it correctly?
This is based on our plans, which are 10-year plans. Yes, so if it's our target for each herd, and by this, it's by region and by state. So by region, we're trying to hit a certain target based on all of our management plans, the summation of all of them.
So, I'm sorry, you imply that there's a 10-year plan then?
Yeah, we're going to get to that today.
Okay.
And it's 10-year by herd. We'll get to this. This is a herd
Are they on the
management
same
plan.
timeline? Are they on the same timeline? They're not, are they?
They're on
I can
different
feel it.
timelines.
I can feel it.
Trying to make your head explode right now.
No
yes.
worries, go ahead. Dang, this is hard.
All right,
Ready.
let's move on to column 9, which is number of animals classified.
6, 7, 8, 9, okay.
This is under post-hunt. Okay, so number of animals classified. This is the number of animals we're actually seeing on the ground when we're doing our classification surveys. So this is by flights or however we're looking at animals. And for deer, just to make sure you're with us, we classified total 70,663 deer, and for elk, 96,000 elk. That's an amazing number of animals that we actually look at.
That is an amazing number. When it's blank, though, it's zero then?
Excuse me?
If there's no number in the number of animals classified in the row, then there was zero observed. So for example, in the northeast plains?
We
deer?
probably combine that with all of northeast. I think she's referring to this.
I'm up here.
So that row is northeast and northeast plains. We have that combined into one region, so it's under northeast.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We ready to move on to sex ratio?
Can I just ask a question, Matt? Is there, so there's no post-hunt populations or population objective range for bears, right? Because of just the nature of
Nature of man.
predator, right, and the animal? Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to sex ratio under the post-hunt column. That's column 9. We have objective range for sex ratio, and remember, we have two, and you'll learn about this more later, we have two major objectives in our herd management plans. Each herd has a plan. The sex ratio range is one of those objectives. So we have a minimum and a maximum in those herd management plans. And these are averages. So for Northwest, it would be the average of all the plans on the minimum range of the sex objective, and then also the maximum average. Nope. Okay.
Can you restate?
Yes, let's look at, so you're with me with column 9. We have post-hunt. And then underneath that, we have sex ratio, which is males per 100 females. And I should say, this is not a percentage. This is the number of males per 100 females. It's commonly confused as a percentage.
Okay.
And then let's look at objective range underneath that. See how it says objective range? Okay, underneath that, we have minimum and maximum. So what this column objective range is it's a summation, just like for what we talked about with populations. Each herd has a herd management plan, and we have a certain number of herds in the Northwest region. And each one of those herds has a sex ratio objective that we're trying to hit, and that is 26.8 in the Northwest for deer on the first line as the minimum part of the range. And this is for males, okay? So 26.8 males per 100 females is the minimum number of animals, not animals, the ratio, and the maximum is 29.4. Go ahead.
So it looks like we've exceeded the maximum in the observed column. So how does that then impact the number of licenses?
Good question. So let's just, okay, so we have the minimum and the maximum. That's set in the plan. That's a 10-year commitment, okay? So then we get to the observed column, which you're looking at now. That's what we observed in 2018. So we are above that range. So we are going to be trying to move our herds towards that objective. All right, so we're going to.
When you say that, you mean we're going to increase the number of licenses so that there's more takes, so that we reduce that number?
Yes, and we're going to try to increase male licenses because we're trying to move the male-to-female ratio down, right? Okay. She's shaking her head, yes, she gets it.
I get it. This goes back to the skit conversation. Unfortunately, Dan's not here for the skit conversation we had earlier. This would be a great skit. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay.
We'll laugh at this later.
And the 3-year average, that gives you perspective on which direction we're going. So if you look at the 3-year average, we're at 33.7 for the Northwest for deer, and that's an average. And if, one second, please. And if you 133.7, if you compare that with 32.6, it's showing you that we're going down in 2018. So we're headed towards that direction, towards the objective range set in the plans. With me?
So is the 3-year average is a look back, 3 years?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, how relevant is it to basically get all the data together for a particular region? Because isn't there some areas where we might have very different and some areas, so like for instance, maybe one area in the Northwest will be way higher than objective and one area will be way below. So is there a lot of relevance in actually looking at it as compiled data, or is it
That's
really
up to you,
situation
and that's up to our hunters. I think so. I think at a regional perspective, this tells you what's happening in the region, and then we can break it down on the next sheets. It's by herd, so you can get down to the finer detail.
Okay.
And that's where we're going next. Go ahead, Marie.
Well, I was going to say, you might explain that even though it's by region,
Use your microphone, I can't hear you.
sorry, you might explain that even though it's by region, then I think Shannon or somebody might get to it later of the units in that region and how the licenses are allocated to that region.
That goes back to the map.
Yes, exactly.
We're good.
Okay.
Did you have a question, Lee? Did you have a question?
No, I got it.
Okay, the last major point I want to make on this is probably the most confusing thing on this whole sheet. And this is lost on a lot of people. So we'll go slow. And you'll see the 2 stars next to objective range and observed. That's under column 9, post-hunt, sex ratio, the objective range, 2 stars. See that?
Yeah.
And it's also next to observed. And if you look at the bottom left part of the spreadsheet, it says weighted for 2018 post-hunt population size. What does that mean? All right, so not all herds are equal in size. So we should not be treating them as they were equal in size. So let's use an example. D2 is our largest deer herd in the state in the Northwest. It explains 10% of the size of our statewide deer population. So it should get 10% of that average or more.
But if I just
It's more important to weight that more.
33.
If we had a very small herd that was treated as the same size as D2, that would skew our sex ratio average.
Okay, that's awesome. And in this moment, I just want to make a correlation between, so you have an equitable way that you determine the numbers based on the needs and the size and all the things. So this is the same, like when we talk about equity inclusion, this is one example of how you are equitably distributing your resources to ensure and meeting the needs and demands that vary across the state. So just wanted to make a connection to equity. I think equity, people think, oh, just people, but no, it's also in the allocation of our resources. So this is really wonderful to be able to see that connection, so thank you. Are you going to talk about the yellow?
Oh, yes, good. Yes, the yellow. So the yellow is highlighted yellow, and you see at the bottom it says pronghorn inventory is pre-hunt. That's just, the column says post-hunt, but for pronghorn, we do our classification surveys in August. So it's pre-hunt, it's before we do the hunting seasons. Okay? Did you want to say anything on that, Julie? You look like you were talking, so. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the next sheet if we're ready, which is just for deer. Graduated from middle school to freshman, I hope. Okay, so.
Need the correct term, since I have one of these kids, is a first year.
First year.
I can't call him a freshman either.
So those who may be following with us online, this is the 3rd page, I believe, in the summary of 7 pages. It's the 2nd page that I handed out to the commissioners this morning. It says 2019 deer as the title. And we're diving further down into the weeds here. So this is if you look at all the columns, there's a lot of data here. And on the left-hand side is a numerical list of all of our deer herds. It says DAU, so if you pull out your reference guide, that'll say Data Analysis Unit, Analysis Unit, and that'll be explained more later. Right now, just call it a herd. So this is herd number in that first left-hand column. And within that herd number, go ahead, Commissioner.
How do these DAUs, or when we get to this later, correlate to the regions?
Oh, yeah, so maybe we should add that. You'd have to look at the map.
I would imagine, but I would love to see.
Yeah, right now, you'd have to look at the map to see where those DAUs fall. We don't have a reference on this spreadsheet. We can add
You can add a
that.
key, I think, even, if you wanted to.
We could for ranges.
You know, I just, in general, when I see a spreadsheet, I don't want to have to go and find a whole bunch of other things to help me understand the spreadsheet. So either put it in
That's the kind
there.
of feedback that's useful. We can add the regional acronym, so.
Yeah.
Or you could have the whole row highlighted green.
That's a good one. Color coded. Or add a column.
Okay, that'll get busy because it's not perfectly blocked off, so we'll think
Again,
about
I
how
think
best to
just
do
in
that.
general, the bigger concern is,
Yeah.
yeah, making the connection so that it makes sense. Because now we're using a different measure and it's hard. But anyway, go ahead. This is a tough one.
Okay, so left-hand column, DAU, let's just focus on that being a herd number right now.
Okay.
And then the units involved, what does that mean? That is game management units. And the way I describe this is we kind of manage our herds based on a DAU, but we manage our hunters based on GMUs.
Can you say that again, please?
We manage our hunters and our hunt codes, our hunting is managed at the GMU level, but we manage biologically, we manage our populations at the DAU level.
Animals. But GMU isn't on this sheet anywhere, right?
Well, it is in hiding. It is under units
these are
involved. Yeah, units involved is game management units, GMUs.
Well, when you pull a license, you're talking about this area.
So just to check if you're with me,
This is
we
good,
have deer herd number 1, so we call that D1. Units involved, D1 has units, game management units 1, 2, and 201.
This makes sense.
Okay?
So,
Do we have access to the internet that we can pull up some maps onto the screen?
Well, we could pull up one of the presentations that has a map. Someone has a deer herd map. Shannon does. Laura, can you pull up Shannon's presentation and go to the DAU map for deer? I think it's like slide 7.
My brain hurts. I'm learning so much. We're only an hour in.
Okay, Commissioner Adams, if you look at the screen, this is all the herds that have been classified in Colorado for deer. Okay, so you see upper northwest corner is D1, and D1 has 3 game management units delineated. We have 1, 2, and 201. And Craig mentioned that he's worked in other states, and this is the most complicated. I've also worked in other states. This is the most complicated that I've seen. So don't feel bad that this is really tough and challenging to understand.
Okay. Have we considered revisiting how we do this? So it's less complicated?
I'm not going to address that one.
Okay, well, can we put it in the kitty somewhere? I used to be a slave, so I know that things can change. Good talk.
Okay, so going back to the deer sheet. Let's go to that first column. It says below for the GAU 1, herd 1. It says 2018 relative to population objective range. So this column is telling us whether we are below the range set in the herd management plan, whether we're above the range in the herd management plan, or whether we're within it. And we've highlighted them to draw your eyes to each one.
Okay.
All right, the next columns reflect the population objective range that's set in the herd management plans.
Yep.
We have a minimum, we have a maximum, and we have a target. And you may be wondering why it's the same number for some of these herd units. And that's because we didn't have a range always. So a lot of these herd management plans that are outdated, they have the same number. So that's an easy way to look at it and say, well, this is probably an old plan. So 13,500, 13,500, 13,500 for all three, the minimum, the maximum, and the target. That's coming from an older plan. The newer plans do have a range.
So I just want to do a process check. This is Reed, that this is useful. This is really in-depth stuff, and we can continue to have this discussion, or we can do it offline. I'd just like to hear the will of the commissioners. We can continue to have this. It will come at the expense of some of the other presentations at some point, so.
Commissioner Bray.
Yeah, my purpose in asking these gentlemen to do, and ladies to do this, is for our hunters, this is extremely important. Every one of us that hunts looks down. I go down here to line 24, for example. My unit is unit 70. That's where I live. That's where I hunt. That's where I run my business. These numbers going across are very important to me. And that's why in May, this is such an important document to study and understand from a macro view, because you're going to make decisions on licenses, and this is awful detailed, there's no question, and we could spend all day on it, and my suggestion is we kind of move on. But my point I want to make, this is something you really need to become educated on, because we handle this in May of every year, and it is the guts of the year, really, for the hunter. And it has revenue implications, everything. Everything's tied to these numbers. But to understand them, it is confusing. But you guys are doing a great job, but I think it'd take all day I think we should move on.
Yeah, I think I would add, just as some general feedback and maybe just for the future, I think we're getting lost in the trees. While I agree the trees are important, particularly for those who rely on this data, I just wonder if we might, for our benefit, take a cross-section and really simplify it and just, take one unit and walk us through what that is. Because I think we can apply sort of that understanding to sort of the granular data, just so that we can do our jobs and recognize there's a lot behind that. But help tell the story to us. Sure. So that we don't, I think we're all sort of getting lost in the details and recognize that this is where you live, which is great. I always am appreciative of the analysts and the data folks, because we need that. If you can bring it back up and help us understand it better from a sort of the lay person's perspective, that would be
Sure,
great.
and we'd be happy to do that. One thing we're considering as well is making this into more of a dashboard type document, but have this in the background. So I know there's some data junkies on the commission, and I have a whole bunch of them right here with me too. So this document would still exist, but to roll it up more in a dashboard. And for those that are really interested or want to learn more, we can take this offline as well and do something at the Denver office as well, if that's an opportunity.
I would recommend doing a follow-up maybe virtually, so we don't have to go anywhere. We can just have like a 1-hour follow-up. But also moving forward, I think in general, we may want to differentiate the sessions, because some of us are coming in and never have had these conversations. So I want to go into the weeds. I need to understand the connection between the micro and the macro. But I understand many commissioners have been serving for years, so they already have a stronger familiarity. So we may need to differentiate next year based on content expertise. But in the interim, I love Carrie's suggestion around just moving through the process with one unit to see the story.
Sure, and I think those are good suggestions. One thing we can do as well is the way we had trouble finding where to put this presentation. I think it could either go at the end of what we're doing today or at the beginning. We chose the beginning, but I think if we were to hold this off a little bit and go through some of these other presentations, it might provide some light or guidance into this discussion as well. You're kind of getting familiar with some of this terminology, but even this document makes my eyes glaze over, and this is where I live and work most of the time. So maybe we can go through that.
Why don't we move on as you suggest, but I do think you've got a lot of interest from some of the commissioners on that data, and so it's important, I think, to work with them to get a second session.
Okay,
to
great.
Get through the detail.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hassel.
Thank you. Just kind of a little note, though. We are a self-funded agency, and this is our biggest revenue for the wildlife side, so it is very important. So I don't want to see us totally skip over it, but we do need to move on, and maybe in July, we can have another workshop and continue on.
The other thing that I'll just add quickly to this conversation too is that don't forget that there are biologists and district wildlife managers and AWMs all around this state, and any one of us at any point in time will always make time for any one of you to sit down and go over some of these details and data and have some of those conversations, so please reach out.
Gosh, now you tell me.
Yeah. Well, we waited till today for that purpose.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because we all come from different levels, and we really cannot spend our meetings bogged down in some of these details. And I have found, if I call Danielle, she will take the whole day, whether she likes it or not. These people will, all of them. If you call them, and you can go over to 6060 Broadway, and they will sit down with you, and they will spend whatever time it takes to bring you up to a level that you're comfortable with. So I think that's important that you take advantage of that.
So I'll just wrap this up. I've been with CPW for 2.5 years now, and when I came here, I was shocked that the commission was looking at this level of detail. And when I think about this, what you're really focused on is the performance of herd management plans and whether or not we're meeting the objectives set in those herd management plans. Those are our contracts with the public. It should not matter what the license recommendations are, as long as we're going to the objective ranges set in the herd management plans. So when we produce some kind of mock-up of a dashboard, that's what I have in mind, is that we're telling you the status of the herd, where we are, and moving towards those objectives. And that, if you see something that's off track, you can flag it and say, what's going on here? But otherwise, I totally agree with you, Commissioner Hauser, that these are the trees, it's not the forest.
I need to see.
Just as a point of clarification.
Just a comment.
Just quick clarification, since it was my comment. I appreciate both, no question. I mean, I value and respect that this is our job, and I just don't want us to, I just wouldn't want us to get tripped up by such a level of detail that we're not comprehending the sort of the big picture, the philosophy, how this works, how this operates. I mean, even just to take one unit or herd and walk us through what that means, and I think then we get an understanding of how that sort of macro process works. And maybe that's just me. So I'm also happy to take it offline and just offer that feedback. I just, as we were sitting here, I think both of us were realizing that there may be some additional ways to do this.
Mm-hmm. So we're approaching the time for a break.
I think we can just keep going, but
For his last
I
meeting.
do think, just to wrap this up, you have some more detail that some commissioners want, so whatever mechanism, let's do that, but let's keep going.
Okay, next up.
Because part of what today can be is, what's the next presentation? Here's 3 commissioners that would like us, a separate session, which I know we have to notice and all that, but I mean, that's how I was wanting to go through it. And obviously, Commissioner Hauser's giving you an idea on a follow-up, I think, so.
All right, we'll walk into the next presentation. Shannon Schaller.
Commissioner Veal, you have a comment?
I do. Just one point that I think one of the most important things we do, not just the commission, but our staff, are herd management plans. Because that's the basis of everything. And I personally, and I'm sure Commissioner Bray, we go through them in detail. Because I want to see what is all the input that's going into that herd management plan, because that sums up a lot of this stuff. So that's something to keep in mind, is that when we look and approve or disapprove a herd management plan, that's an important function that we do as a commission. Sorry, Shannon, go ahead. You're the herd management plan expert, so.
Welcome, Shannon.
Good morning. Well, I feel like my presentation has had all of these strings attached to it from these questions, so I'm hoping to hit the mark and answer some of these questions and engage some conversation in what I'm intending to talk about, which is population management, habitat management, and herd management plans. So with that, I'll say that listening to the West Slope Mule Deer strategy objectives and strategies this morning was a good platform for me to talk about population management and habitat management in the state. And that whole strategy was initiated because of declining deer populations. And there are multiple reasons why we would employ different population management and habitat strategies across the state, and declining populations would be one of them. But I think the important thing to know with population management and habitat management, that our ultimate goal is to sustain populations into the future. So that's really the nutshell of everything that we're trying to do. And I know we've talked about the complexities of everything today, and I think That's a really important thing. Wildlife management is complex. It's dynamic in nature. Things are changing. I mean, the Colorado that we have today is much different than the Colorado that we had 20 years ago. And our responsibility as an agency is to take science and sound management and to address those challenges and to work through them. And hopefully what I can give you today is a picture of some of the good work that we're doing across the state to manage for sustainable populations. So goal number 1 of our strategic plan has already been talked about, and everything that, specifically in my section, in the terrestrial section, that we do is geared toward maintaining wildlife and habitat for healthy, sustainable populations to ensure the future of our wildlife. And as wildlife managers, one of the most important things that we need to know is how many animals can a landscape support? All wildlife needs food, water, and shelter, and the quantity and quality of those necessities really affect population levels. So it gets to that understanding, those are some of the measures that we do. What can the habitat support? And our work is directed at managing those populations at those levels so that the habitat stays healthy and that wildlife populations stay healthy. We have a lot of resources directed at collecting data and using that to inform our management and then our understanding of where those populations are. And they're agency-wide efforts to really understand the needs of each population. As it was talked about earlier, when JT was talking about the mule deer strategy, we can't control things like drought or the severity of winters, but what we can do are control the number of animals on the landscape. And that really is our primary tool for managing populations through harvest. And as we talk through DAUs and GMUs, that primary method for us to address these populations is through harvest. So I've just talked about some of the biological reasons that we would manage populations, managing the sustainable levels. We also manage populations for social reasons. We manage populations to reduce conflicts with private landowners, whether it's through game damage or in and around urban areas. We also manage wildlife populations from a social tolerance standpoint. We want people to love wildlife as much as we do, and we have to manage those populations. We also manage some populations to benefit other wildlife. We may manage predators to benefit deer, which was talked about earlier. I think an important note when we talk about management and harvest being our primary method that we use to manage populations is that hunting also benefits wildlife in other ways. It generates revenue for CPW and for the state of Colorado, but hunting is the tool we use to also provide watchable opportunities for people and the enjoyment that people get through just recreation and seeing wildlife. So that kind of tees me up to why is managing populations important? We've already talked about all of these complex things about wildlife in Colorado being a changing landscape. But we have the need to manage the number of animals on the landscape because where wildlife and people overlap, we can get conflicts. And as an agency, 2 of the main conflicts that we deal with are game damage and then urban wildlife conflicts. And managing the number of animals on the landscape can help reduce those conflicts. And specifically with game damage, it's really important for us to manage our herds to reduce game damage conflicts from a financial standpoint. Each year we can spend over $1 million in game damage claim to private property owners. And an important factor of that is not just the revenue standpoint of it. Our relationship with private property owners is really important. If you look at the eastern half of the state where most everything is private land, those private landowners own the habitat where our wildlife live. So maintaining that relationship with them and being responsible to our herds is important to reducing conflicts. I mean, you see a picture of a bear up there in garbage, and when I say managing those urban conflicts, there's a human safety component for us to managing our wildlife. It's our responsibility to protect human safety. That's our number 1 goal as it relates to wildlife. And if we can manage our population at sustainable levels, we can help reduce some of those conflicts with wildlife in and around people. Wildlife in and around people is a difficult thing to manage, and not only is it protecting human safety, but we do it to protect wildlife. Wildlife that come into urban areas are at risk from threats from domestic dogs, road strikes, or just other factors that can be a negative influence on population levels. Another reason why we manage populations is because I talked about managing the number of animals on the landscape. Habitat can only support so many animals, and when you get higher densities of animals, you can get habitat degradation, which can ultimately have habitat or population level impacts. You can get things like disease from higher densities of animals, and we've talked a lot about CWD. That's one of them that happens when we don't manage or control the densities of animals on the landscape. Wildlife populations go through booms and busts, and as an agency, we're trying to control those booms and busts, and we're trying to stabilize those populations so that we do have wildlife for everyone to enjoy. And when we manage the wildlife on the landscape, we're protecting habitat so that we don't have those negative influences as a population level. We can also reduce those diseases that can occur from densities. But another benefit to it is that we can manage wildlife behavior. And this is tied back to those urban wildlife instances. Using population management and harvest specifically on wildlife changes animal behavior. When animals get in and around people, they can lose their fear of people, which should be something they naturally have. But harvest is a tool that we use to change behavior. We don't want people, or we don't want wildlife in town and in and around people in an unnatural setting. And so that's another benefit of population management and the harvest that we use. I'd be, remiss if I didn't say that all of that is complex, right? That's a lot for us to figure out how to do. Colorado has all different kinds of urban areas and stakeholders to work with, but it's our responsibility to manage wildlife, but it really gets accomplished through the collaboration with private landowners, other land management agencies, and our ability to actually implement our strategies are dependent on our relationship with private landowners and Forest Service and BLM, and our wildlife managers are constantly working on achieving our strategies. And one of the struggles we've had, and I know you've heard about it on the commission, is achieving harvest in open spaces or urban areas where we would like to be able to manage populations. And so that's an ongoing thing. It's probably a theme you'll hear as commissioners, is that we need to collaborate with open spaces to help us get toward our population objectives and our sex ratios, and then also reduce these conflicts with people and issues that we get like disease. So I'm going to use, we'll get to hear about the mule deer strategy. That's a great example of all the tools that we have available to help us manage wildlife and to be successful. I'm also going to use Colorado's moose story as kind of a good example of some of the successes we've had with wildlife management, and then also some of the challenges that we face. So I'm just going to ask a question. How many of you here have seen a moose in Colorado before? Raise your hand. Which is great. If I had asked that question 10 years ago, it would be a lot less people. I mean, we are really lucky to have an increasing moose population. Not the rest of the United States and other states are not necessarily dealing with that. And so starting in about 1980, Colorado did not have an established moose population. And CPW took that opportunity to transplant 24 moose into the Walden area to establish a breeding population. And several other transplants have occurred since then, but really the most of the moose in Colorado that are around are a result of that transplant from 1980. And at this time, we have an estimated over 2,500 moose in Colorado, which is amazing. That's one of them where you can, the feather in the cap. That's a great story of taking an opportunity and providing an experience for people and recreational opportunities. With that in mind, I'm talking about our increasing moose population, which is a great thing. Some of the challenges are now going to come into light. So predators for moose don't really exist in Colorado. We don't have grizzly bears and wolves to speak of, and so our job as a wildlife agency is to manage those populations. Moose hunting licenses have increased at the same time our moose populations have increased, which is a great thing. Moose hunting is a highly desirable recreational opportunity. Each year, about 15,000 people apply for 300 licenses. So we're never going to meet the demand, obviously, of our applications, but it's obvious that it's something that people really enjoy, and that's for residents and non-residents. It's also highly regulated. If you draw a bull moose license and you harvest, you're done hunting bull moose in your lifetime. So we recognize that it's highly desirable, and we're working to meet, this recreational demand, but it also is a highly regulated hunting opportunity. We provide that recreational opportunity through hunting, but another important factor of when we talk about moose management is the watchable component to moose. People travel from other states to come to Colorado to photograph and just see moose. I mean, there's some really good spots. Around Brainerd Lake is a great spot to see moose. I've seen some spectacular pictures of Summit County is a place where a lot of moose live, which I'll get to in a minute. There's some of the other things, but we're working to provide that recreational opportunity, which is just through a watchable element.
Shannon, can
go ahead.
ask you a question on moose? Are there parts of the state that are great moose habitat that moose have not gotten to yet? Or have we sort of saturated all of our, because I know how important this population is not only to us, but to the whole country, is moose in other parts of the country are under a lot of stress.
I would say that we have dispersing moose and small populations of moose in a lot of the available habitat, but we don't necessarily have established populations. I mean, the southeast region is an area where I know Dan would have liked to have more moose over time, and they're getting there. They're leaving, South Park and going into the southeast region. So I think there's still some room to have some more established populations, but it's pretty amazing where moose get to on their own. Several years ago, we had a moose in Iliff, Colorado, which is not exactly ideal moose habitat, but one thing that you need to know about moose is they go wherever they want and whenever they want, and so they're pretty good about getting to those places. But yeah, we have the opportunity to have more established populations, I think, given our available habitat.
Thank you.
Yep. So with those increasing and dispersing moose, we also get conflicts with moose. And I would venture to guess that most everybody in here has seen a video of a moose chasing a snowboarder or a skier in Breckenridge, or falling through a window well in Breckenridge and landing in somebody's room. And that happens as we get increasing moose populations. I said moose go wherever they want, whenever they want. And they overlap with people in urban areas, and they don't really have a fear of anything. And so our job is to manage those conflicts, and again, it ties back to managing those populations and understanding that we need to protect human safety. One of the things that has come from these increasing moose populations is an intolerance for moose in urban areas, and JT knows in Breckenridge, I mean, there's a demand to manage those moose and from our agency to protect human safety. And to just kind of give you a scale about moose in Summit County specifically, so I started my career in 2002 in Summit County as a DWM. And my very first call by myself was 2 moose at the outlet centers in Silverthorne, and it was a big deal. There were helicopters flying over, and I was the only one on duty that day, and there were hundreds of people surrounding these moose because it was a very big deal to see moose in Silverthorne at the outlet stores. And somehow I managed to live through that experience. But if you go to Silverthorne today, and you see moose at the outlet stores, it's not a big deal. So we've come a long way, so that's a success of it. But it is challenging to figure out how to work through those conflicts that may arise, and that's really where the science and the collected data that we use in balancing all of that out is how we achieve sustainable moose populations. And if you look at other states in the United States, they're not doing so well with their moose populations, and we don't exactly know why. There's a lot of moose research going on, but what we do know is that if you don't manage moose at sustainable levels and you allow densities of moose to get to a point where they degrade the habitat, that you can lose entire populations of moose. And so that's our job, is to collect the data, understand what the habitat can support, provide opportunities, and make sure that we have moose where we can have moose and into the future.
Janet, can I ask you one more?
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by moose. So we know that New Hampshire and the Minnesota herds are essentially being destroyed by ticks. Do we have any risks there from climate change in our future, and how would we kind of respond to that?
You know, that's something that we keep an eye on with our moose populations. We don't have necessarily the same overlap with whitetail in moose like they do in those other states, so that's one thing that we're not similar to. But as you get densities of animals and environmental factors change like temperatures, they do have the ability to be at risk for disease. And we do have some winter tick experience in Colorado. We kind of keep an eye on it, but we have not experienced the same thing, and part of it is just the habitat and the other species around them that aren't exactly the same. But we do keep an eye on other states so that we can have moose into the future.
So no ghost moose in Colorado, right?
We do have some ghost moose in Colorado. Not a lot, but we do have those. South Park, which is a part of this E18 that we'll get to later.
Yeah, that's different than the tick. The ghost moose is a different issue.
Yeah, maybe I'm just throwing terms around. I thought in our moose presentation a few years ago, that was when you had 10,000 ticks on a moose and they'd sucked all the blood out. And
Well, so when you're talking about ghost moose, that's loss of hair on a moose, I think is what you're referring to, which can be from ticks. And we do actually have some mortality from ticks in moose. Sometimes it may be an animal that's weaker to begin with and gets ticks, and then the loss of hair makes it susceptible to the winter cold and it dies. But we have not seen the levels of diseases like that affecting our populations. But that's why it's really important for us to collect data to really understand what the carrying capacity is and manage to that.
thank you. Sorry to divert you.
No, that was a great question. Okay, all right. So Reed showed you a slide of some habitat work that was done during the mule deer strategy, and I also have some pretty pictures up there showing some habitat work. So another way that we manage wildlife is through habitat management. Through population management, we can affect the number of animals on the landscape, but through habitat management, we can change what the landscape is capable of supporting. And that's really the goal of our habitat management, is changing either the number of animals that the landscape can support or diversifying the species, reducing competition between species on the landscape by diversifying the habitat. And we talked about some of these example prescribed burns. They change the successional stage of either a forest by allowing grasses and shrubs to go up, which benefit multi-species. A lot of the work that we do is removing tree cover. So you get trees and either lack of fire, you get this decadent overstory and everything underneath can't get the nutrients that we need. We can remove overstory to allow nutrients to reach the ground and grow up. And like I said, the goal can actually be single species specific, or it can be multi-species. And they're a great way to do hands-on wildlife management. And on the previous screen, and I think I can get back to it. Yeah, I have some examples of some wildlife management. The upper right-hand corner is some tree clearing in E18 that was referenced earlier. We'll see a video on that next. But I do have a picture here of our director standing in front of a piece of equipment to do some habitat work. And Dan, if you have the opportunity to kind of explain what that picture depicts and, what the goal of the project was and maybe some benefits to wildlife.
Sure. That's a shared project with the Land Board and the Turkey Federation, and I think we had a video on that at the commission a couple years ago, and it's still ongoing. It's a cooperative effort. I'll do this quickly with the State Land Board again and the Wild Turkey Federation and Parks and Wildlife. And we, Land Board bought the piece of equipment. We're paying the operations of that piece of equipment, and it's called a hydroax. It's about a $500,000 piece of equipment, and the Turkey Federation manages the contract and the supervision of that employee that runs it. And so that machine is running pretty much every day now. We just moved it to the Northwest region. It's been in the Southeast region for a year. And we do joint projects on our properties and the Land Board properties. But suffice it to say that machine's between $400 and $600 an hour to run if you contract it. And I'm looking at Brad Henley somewhere, but I think we're averaging a little around $100 an hour with our own piece of equipment. So four times less money to do habitat work on the ground. So that's just one of the many things we try and do.
I was with, last year, the HPP Council was in Trinidad, and we visited the Spanish Peak State Wildlife Area and watched that in operation. And it's just terrific. I mean, the work they've done on that state wildlife area is tremendous, and a lot of it was that machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting the way it gobbles up trees.
It's amazing.
Commissioner Adams.
This is fantastic. Justin, I hope your ears are burning, because I was thinking, man, it'd be great to see how the budget correlates to these different big bucket activities by both the buckets and the regions. Again, from that equity lens, where are we seeing the hot spots? Where are we seeing the projects? Does our budget align to those hot spots? Be really helpful. So again, not something I expected you to do, but just a connection I wanted to make. Thank you.
No, that's a great opportunity. If you go to Google and you put in CPW, Hydroax, that video will pop up. It's pretty amazing. It's just like a giant lawnmower, just mows everything down. And if you want to see wildlife management in action, it's a pretty cool display of that. And I actually have a video, not that one, but a video of some wildlife management going on in South Park. And the video that I'm going to show you was shot by our public information officer. So again, this was an opportunity for us to tell our story about the work we're doing. And it's wildlife management in E18. And the focus of the project is to remove overstory and improve winter range. And this is an area just south of Fairplay that it's a state wildlife area, so even better, we're doing habitat work on our own properties. But it's a winter range area for anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 elk in the winter. And we've historically had conflicts with ag producers in and around this wildlife area, and it's reduced those conflicts by holding animals on winter range and improving overall herd performance. So with that, I'll show you the video and really highlight some of the great work that our staff is doing. Laura, I may need you to help cue up the video for me, please. think that's available also like on our CPW Facebook page, and a great way to tell our story and show that we're putting money that we generate back into benefiting wildlife and improving habitat and reducing conflicts. So with that, we will go to herd management plans. And so just an overview of herd management plans. We've dived into this a little bit over the previous talks, but our herd management plans are guiding documents that direct our management and prescribe our management strategies for getting to our population ranges and our sex ratio ranges for each herd. So let's go to this map here. So we've talked about DAUs and game management units, and let's try to get it up to this macro level and understand it. So all of our herds are broken up into data analysis units, so DAUs. And that DAU is a geographic boundary that encompasses the year-round and seasonal movements for that herd. So we're trying to direct management on that herd, and the way we direct it is by defining the geographic area of that herd. And we understand the geographic area through the collection of science. So does that make sense as far as like just kind of the big picture? That's what the DAU is. And how do we know where those DAUs are? We do have this particular map on our website. And so for each species, it has the DAU map. But really, from what does a hunter need to know about, the game management unit is really the most important part of the DAU. And that's the fine scale of how we manage both wildlife and people. And that distributes hunters evenly across the landscape and also allows us to refine and direct our harvests in each management. So each DAU usually has multiple game management units. Some may have one game management unit, but really they usually have multiple. And so we have DAUs for all of the different big game management units. So any questions on that before I go on to anything? That's just kind of the big scale of, our herd management plans are designed to dictate how we're going to manage those wildlife through different strategies, and this is how they're broken up. Does that clarify that a little bit better from earlier?
Oh, no, I understand the concept, but it's just, even if you look at this.
Yeah.
And that, it's nothing to do with this.
Yeah. No, I understand. I think it's complex, right? And there's only so much we can put in the brochure, and it does get bigger every year. But yeah, I understand the relation back to it in the question.
If you did an overlay of your elk, your DAUs, and your game management units, good luck trying to, right?
That's the challenge, right? How to convey what we need to without making it more complex and making it easily readable.
Mr. Adams.
And here it seems like there's a great opportunity to engage our youth in solving some of these real-world problems. So they are all about not all of them, but there are many high school high school programs that are dealing with coding and GIS mapping and all kinds of cool things. And if there's some kind of competition on like how can I offer raw data that is available publicly anyway, and then have a competition. I mean, I'm just offering different ways. So I recognize that we have a complex problem to solve, but I think oftentimes we just rely on the adults in the room and don't give opportunities for some of these young folks who are really coming up and are in a position to, A, want to gain the experience, and B, I know a lot of educators are really looking for meaningful opportunities for our young people. So, I really encourage us to think creatively about who else we can engage in problem solving. And, I definitely would love to see some overlays around some of these different components. So just encourage us to continue to push on what that means and who can be involved. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Luke just mentioned something, and I had never thought about this way before, but I've seen this stuff for my whole life, so it's not different to me. So the DAU is basically for management. The units are for the hunters. So there's different purposes for those, but a lot of it also is geographically where things lay and how things migrate. if that helps you at all.
Well, no, I mean, I understand the correlation, but to be able to see the pieces overlay visually with the different maps could be really cool, and maybe offer some data or perspectives that we may not see when we see them stagnant and separate from each other.
Sure, yeah, and I get it, understanding the connection and how everything goes, so.
It's a general theme for me.
Let me just give you a comment too. Again, just what my career has been, we would see, I can just promise you, if we came into a company that looked like this, we'd say it's overly complicated. That trying to be perfect is getting in the way of simplicity. And every time there's complication, there's more inefficiency. It's just a function of humans. So to me, the project that I will not be here for, but would be to look at this and think about it from all these different angles, the ones that Commissioner Adams is talking about, because complexity for sure is a barrier to new users, right? This is very intimidating when you're in hunter safety, right? Like, well, I think I'll start with fishing because a big game is too hard to understand. So to me, that's one of the projects over time that you'd have to think about is, are we trying to be too perfect on the biology? Like I had a bear tag, I got it, and it was in the GMU, and then I realized that, yeah, it's in the GMU, but only on this half of the river. And that level of targeting, it's been real easy for me to become a poacher just by accident and not realize that. So there's a lot of this complexity that I would just encourage the agency to think about. Is there an opportunity to open up, the ease? It's easier for us to recruit. It's easier for people to do it. And to just think about that is a balance to the biology. And I know you do, but it is just very complicated, I think.
It is, and I appreciate those comments. We do have staff specifically directed at providing seminars and education to people about how to get through our application process. Elk hunting 101. I have an elk license now, what do I do? And we over time increased and are trying to find more ways to direct it at lowering, the complexity level by increasing the education and awareness of people. So I think we're working that way, but yeah, your comments are definitely.
Yeah, and then let me just comment on that. That's one of the first things we would do in a business is we'd say, well, you have to have people called hunt planners on staff. That ought to be telling you it's too complicated, right? So there's elements of it as you guys go to educate people on the complexity. I'm just asking you to think about, well, wait, maybe we should take some of that complexity away.
Sure.
And then we don't have those, then we have those folks doing other things, free up budget, all those types of things.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So the point of this slide is really to illustrate that each of our herd management plan objective ranges are a balance of all the biological and social considerations, right? We look at the habitat, and that's our biological side. What is our recruitment in the population? Do we have disease or other biological factors? But those are also balanced with, are there other demands on the landscape, other recreation? Are there refuge areas where we can achieve harvest? Are there conflicts with wildlife? And all of that is a balance to really determine what our objective ranges will be in our herd management plans.
You answered. Okay.
So there's several key components of a herd management plan that are important to know. We've talked about the population and objective ranges. There's also historical information from each herd. If you had the time to sit down and read through all of them, you would learn an awful lot about the habitat and how it's been managed. It'd be a great opportunity to learn about everything. And it also outlines the strategies that we're going to use to get toward those objective ranges. And as talked about earlier, they're each set into place for 10 years at a time, and at the end of 10 years, the update can be in a simple extension of the current objective ranges, or they might be a complete revision, and the complexity of the management issues in the DAU and or new information or even a habitat change like a fire may ultimately change your objective ranges, but they are in place for 10-year cycles is really what you need to know about the life of that document, and they guide management for 10 years.
How many herd management plans are there? Or how many herds are there that we're managing?
217.
Thank you.
217. Most herd management plans are focused on the big game species like deer, elk, and pronghorn, and we do have some for bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and moose. And some of those herds, we do not have herd management plans, either because the license allocation is so minimal that we don't need, there may be one license in a GMU for bighorn sheep. And so either the amount of data that we have is very minimal, or the needs to outline a herd management plan are not there. And so there's not a complex plan to designate how you're going to manage those species.
Okay, thank you.
So this slide illustrates kind of the process that we go through to get toward a herd management plan approval, which comes through you. And without going through each part and piece of the herd management plan process, I think the most important thing for you to know is that herd management plans are an agreement that we have with the public for how we're going to manage a herd. We've said this is how we're going to manage a herd, and we manage toward that through our license allocation. It's also an internal agreement. These are discussions that go on with DWMs and AWMs of how we're going to manage a herd, so it's our internal agreement.
Sorry, GWAMWM?
District Wildlife Manager, Game Warden, yep.
I believe you.
Yep, sorry about that.
It's all right.
It's important to note that, there's a lot of collected data in there, but one of the most important pieces, I think, in a herd management plan is the public involvement piece. And this involves getting feedback from the public in survey format, personal communication. We hold public meetings, which I think is a great opportunity. If there's a herd management plan public meeting in the area that you cover, that'd be a great opportunity for you to be able to come and hear what the public says about how they want something managed. And that public component is really what helps us refine where we're going with management, helps us determine what our objective ranges are going to be after we've offered a suite of alternatives. But in the end, the most important piece is getting that approval by the commission, by you, so that we can set those management strategies into action. And I think that's what I would want you to take away from this. There's a lot that goes in the background, and when we bring it to you, we've hopefully figured out what some of the management issues are and addressed those, and tried to and work toward a management plan that's based on science, balancing out the social considerations for those objective ranges. So any questions on a herd management plan, either the process or the parts and the pieces?
What's the average length of a plan?
As far as number of pages? Well, we're trying to get that to a less complex number, but I would say about 25 pages. And again, it has a lot of historical data. It has maps with land use. That's one of the processes we're looking at, is how to improve that and get these plans even potentially less complex, so that the main points of the population objective and the sex ratio is conveyed to people about, and the management strategies about what we're doing. But I'd say about 25 pages.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Brad.
So I think we're going to make just a little bit of agenda change here. I know the commission specifically mentioned yesterday some need for information on the application rates from last year, so I'm going to have Corey Chick come up and provide that, and then as time allows, we'll go to two other steps in the herd management process. But I think what Corey has to say is something specifically you asked for to help in your decision-making process. So, Corey.
Thanks, Corey.
Morning, Corey.
Morning.
You want the licensing 101 up or not?
Yes, please. My name's Corey Chick, the License and Pass Section Manager. And we built the agenda kind of early, short notice. I actually combined both my topics into one. It just made sense to do so. So I really just have one presentation to run through that'll touch on both topics. My goal really is to give you a very high-level overview of licensing in the draw. Because if we were going down deep into the weeds of it, it would be days of explaining different aspects of the draw. So just going real quick through the different annual license types that we do issue for our agency. Of course, small game fishing, small game and fishing combo, and That one is available to residents only. We also have fur bearers and, of course, numerous other annual products. Our annual license, and you'll hear this come up often when you hear license year. Our license year is April 1 through March 31st annually. All of our licenses are available at all locations, or all CPW locations. We have a large cohort of external agents, so any of your Walmarts, REIs, we have our machines at those agents, and they are also selling our licenses for us. And then also online and by phone. And our annual licenses are non-refundable, and with each first purchase of a license within a license year, a habitat stamp is tacked onto that as well.
I don't understand that last part.
The habitat stamp? So we have a statute that created the habitat stamp and habitat stamp committee. So for each first purchase of a license, we put a habitat stamp at $10 on that license as well, and it goes towards funding that program.
Okay, thank you. And that's the grants.
Single and multi-day licenses, kind of self-explanatory, but for those that don't want to purchase an annual license, we do have that option for our customers as well. Those licenses are valid for the dates that the customer chooses. Again, available to be sold at all locations, non-refundable if after the date. And then again, the habitat stamp would be applied to those after, and this is regulatory, after the third one-day purchase, sorry. Other licenses that we have, lifetime license, so disabled lifetime fishing, disabled veteran lifetime combo, and the disabled veteran lifetime fishing. And then this year, I believe it was House Bill 1080 passed, which allows for us to implement the first responder lifetime combination hunting and fishing and the first responder lifetime fishing. And those licenses are for first responders that have been disabled while in the line of duty that are Colorado residents. So you'll soon see regulations in front of you hoping to implement those programs, hopefully January 1. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Did the legislature give us some funding for that?
No.
No. Thank them.
Sorry.
Inspiring.
Again, the same basics. They're going to be sold up. Actually, these are a little bit different. The lifetime, because they require an application, my staff reviews all those applications and either approves or disapproves based on the information that is submitted by the customer.
Excuse me.
Commissioner
Just real
Garcia.
quick. The first responder, is that current first responders, or could you have been a first responder in the past and now apply?
Both.
But you have to be disabled, right?
Yes, sir. Hopefully see the application. These are our different big game and turkey licenses that we have available. So we have different license types for all of these. Our seasons are set per hunt code for these species. I'll show a hunt code here in a minute and kind of go through it. But each hunt code means something different. So I'll go through one to explain it, just because there's so many different types.
Okay.
And my next goal also to explain is that both myself and my staff, and you can ask any of the commissioners, numerous ones have called me, and that's fine. If you ever receive emails, have conversations, please give me a call. We'll walk you through anything that we do within the section, so feel free.
He will.
Just a quick note for Laura, or she's not here, but it would be helpful if we had a folder on our fancy PDF expert thing on just professional development, and then having folders for each of these types of topics, because I know I'm going to need this, and I'm afraid that I will forget that we did this in June 2018. I want to be able to easily access some of these more training materials.
Seems like they should all be in that commissioner handbook that we talked about what type of stuff. I think, I'm not sure, maybe Director Prince knows which group manages the directors or the commissioner's handbook, but it would be something we certainly don't need to.
Yeah, I don't want to, yeah. Yeah.
We can go back and reference each of these, and I don't know if that's for Steve's group.
Yeah.
I would love that. Thank you, Commissioner Zimmerman.
And since we're talking about licenses, I'll just pass one around.
Oh. Oh, we buy one.
I'll quickly mention Mountain Lion. It has 2 separate seasons, April 1st through April 30th, and November 18th through March 31st. So to get into some of the details around a license, of course, currently right now we do have a qualifying license to apply in our draw. Those qualifying licenses are small game fishing combo, and spring turkey. Non-resident, and this is more just a good example of what we've done in combining different license types, but our non-resident big game license also includes an annual fishing license with it. First time this year as well, our application fees raised to $7 and $9. $7 for resident, $9 for non-resident. Another really nice change I think we made, I believe 2 years ago, in our application, in how we do applications, is that once we went live with iClass and had the ability to have everything internal within that system and a really good customer user face or interface, we have the ability to have the deadline and application changes be on the same day. So at any time during our application period, our customers now, instead of having to email us and us manually changing hunt codes or groups or things like that, anyone could go online onto their account, make those changes all the way up to the date we have the application deadline.
Question about the hunter safety training or something. Is that a requirement for the license piece? Yes. I don't see it on here.
It's and you're talking about hunter ed as far as applying for?
Or do you have to have that training before you can get a license?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you're old.
Yes. Unless you were born January or after January 1st, 1949. Or you can get a, I have it on here.
Provisional?
Oh, right, the novice program.
The apprentice hunter ed. It allows you to hunt 1 year on the apprentice hunter ed.
Cool.
And that was our attempt to try to get both youth and adults in the door the first time, hopefully get them engaged, and then have them go and take hunter ed, be safe hunters, and be customers.
And are there costs associated with the license, with the training for the hunter ed?
I believe it's $10.
Okay, thank you.
Big game and turkey availability. I'll make sure that we send this, just for the sake of time, I'll make sure we can send this presentation through you, or to you. That way you can look through some of this, but this really just goes through our different license types and how they're available. I'll run through one of them real quick just to outline it, but you've heard some of this terminology from Matt earlier, but limited license, over-the-counter with caps, over-the-counter, and special licensing. I'm gonna touch on special licensing. That's one that we really haven't yet. Those are not available through the draw. They're not available in the leftover draw. Those are typically licenses that are given out. We'll use, I mean, it's either a game damage or what we've also termed as an AWM tag. So when we're having issues, we have the ability, both statutory and regulatory, to go in and be able to issue those to go back to previous presentation, but to help solve some of those management issues that we have.
Where do vouchers fall
Microphone.
under?
I'm sorry?
Where do vouchers fall under?
Thank you.
As far as
On this, yeah. The special-
vouchers would fall under, yeah, it's really its own, but it goes through the draw. It's really not a voucher is not a license. It's a voucher to get a license. So I mean, and those are typically limited through the landowner draw. Sorry.
Just a quick question. Are all over-the-counter with caps available online after a certain date?
All over the counter with, and it depends. I'm lucky enough to have the least complex discussion topic ever. But I know.
Could you send that out?
I'm going to touch on it real quick. It depends whether the season started or not.
Okay.
Okay? So if it's prior to the season starting, and it also varies for different species.
That's what
So, and the length of that season. So, a real quick example, a turkey that has a long season, we'll allow those to be sold both at any of our agents or locally. But other seasons that are shorter, it's at our offices only.
Okay.
Okay? And I'll skip through this real quick. If you have any questions on this slide later, please let me know. But again, it's going through license type, by species, and then how those can be distributed to the public. This will take a while if I go through it. Would you? I can go through this or meet with some of y'all individually if you would like, because this really gets in probably into the weeds more than we care to do today. I know y'all are interested in the application rates, so if you would like, I can.
You know, Robert, I'll be honest, to me, this is some of the meat of what the public, I mean, this is what you're going to get emails about.
Right. Yep.
So I would spend some time on it.
I think that's a yes, so I'll go through it.
It's all the sensitive stuff.
If I'm going to hear email about it, yes.
Okay.
The same email 20 times, yeah.
So when you'll hear me talk about draw, this is a lot of what we'll deal with. And these are a lot of the rules, the regulations that really encompass how we run the draw. This is the order. So when we run a draw for a species, this is the order in which we would run that. So it's going to go landowner preference, youth preference, hybrid draw, and then general quota. That's the way the draws run it in order. So it's really one draw that runs in multiple parts. And it does that for a reason, and I'll get into that a little bit. So for landowner preference, which is elk, deer, and pronghorn only, the reason they run in this order is because remaining quota rolls back to the general public if the demand is not there. Okay? Part of the rules that guide landowner preference is west of I-25, there's 10% unrestricted and 10% restricted. Probably get a question on that, so I'll just explain it. The unrestricted means it can be used on public or private. Restricted means it's restricted to private land only.
Point of clarification, so are you saying if I am a private landowner, I can't just shoot or hunt or whatever that euphemism you use, take a deer that's on my property?
Not without a license.
No way. Thank you.
Or unless Dan writes one on a napkin.
Thank you for answering that so clearly, because I see Commissioner McDaniel starting to light up over there for all the things he has on his property. He disagrees. Do we need to bring in Heather to explain law enforcement? That's be my question.
Only if she gets to handcuff him, too.
That's possible.
Hey, Corey, could you clarify that on the restricted, you said to private land only, is it restricted from the landowner who requests it to their own private land or all private land? Isn't it just their own?
All private land.
It's all private land. So
All private land
it's-
within the.
That
so with-
GMU.
Within the unit.
Within the unit?
Within the unit, that's correct.
Okay.
So, and that's the valid units, it could be multiple units. It all depends on that hunt code.
And would you consider the landowner preference as well as youth preferences as we go down the sheet? This was a question we got yesterday. I just want to make sure folks understand, especially the new commissioners. This is that issue around allocation. So the allocation starts actually from the top, landowner preference here, to youth preference, to going down this list, and this would be the sensitive subject as to how these licenses are allocated, because it, in essence, waterfalls to I'll call it the last pool or the general public, correct?
Yes, and some of them are set, for example, the landowner preference is set in statute.
Right. And they also have to have so many acres to be able to apply for those landowner tags. It's not just any landowner.
What is the cap? Is it by region or is there?
No, it's by the land that you own. I don't know what the minimum acres is.
160.
160? You have to own at least 160 acres.
And it has to be contiguous.
Contiguous, that's
Yeah.
correct. 160 contiguous acres. There is no cap based on where you fall out. There's, I think, 19 different tiers. Where you fall out in those tiers depends on how many applications that landowner would get. Okay. Next is youth preference.
Mr. Adams, did you have a question?
We're going to get into this point thing, right? Eventually, this point thing I've been hearing about, preference points?
Preference point.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
It's the point of today, to ask
Yes.
those questions.
So youth preference, again, it runs through for elk, minimum of 15% goes to youth. For antlerless deer, minimum of 15% for antlerless and either sex. And in the Gunnison Basin, 50% of antlerless in GMUs 55s, 66, 67, and 51. So, and pronghorn, a minimum of 15% doe, so. Good deal, go to youth preference. And again, anything that is remaining rolls back into the public quota.
What's the age for youth?
It has no bottom end and up to 16. It's just as long as you, a pass hunter, Ed. Or I'm sorry, it's 14. 14.
I was like,
I thought it was been a long time since I've been in the
no worries,
law
I'm just.
enforcement realm.
It's 12, I thought, yeah.
So what?
I'll get help on some of these.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
The next portion of the draw is, of course, the hybrid draw. This is one that's probably one of the most complex within the draw. Any hunt code that required 10 or more points based on an average of 2007, 8, and 9, those hunt codes fall into the hybrid draw. If you apply for one of those hunt codes and have at least 5 preference points, you're automatically entered into that hybrid draw.
Point of clarification, how do you acquire preference points?
Each year that you apply for a species and are unsuccessful, you get a preference point.
Unless it's the big 3, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And you have to pay a
I'll go
fee.
through- I'm sorry?
Then you have to pay a fee to get the
Okay,
preference.
fine.
That's correct.
Explain that later.
And then also with desert sheep, we use no preference points. It's a true lottery, so,
We're going to get to the big 3?
yes, I'll get to the big 3. I actually have a slide on that, so. And then, of course, we move on to the general public. This is when we get into all the remaining quota. That's where we look at non-resident cap. So up to 35% of the hunt codes that require sorry, this is hard to read.
For each.
Less than 6 preference points for 2007, 8, and 9, and up to 20% of the hunt codes that require 6 or more preference points. So really, there's two caps, and you'll hear 65-35, and you'll hear 80-20. So any hunt code that's in that group that required more than 6 points based on that average, or under that, would have a cap of 65-35. Does that make sense?
65, 35 of what?
So 65%, sorry, and I do need to clarify that. So 65% of the licenses in that group would go to residents. 35%, up to 35% can go to non-residents.
Thank you.
Okay? So if they required more than that 6-point threshold in that time frame, then it falls in a different group. That's what they call the 80-20 split. So in that group, 80% of the quota would go to residents,
Good deal.
and up to 20% would go to non-residents.
So, just to understand that a little more, so to get into the lottery in the first place, you utilize your preference points?
That's correct.
And then if you don't get it, do you get your preference points back, or do they, just by getting into the lottery, you?
So we'll just look at elk. So you're gonna apply, okay? So if it's your first year, you have 0 preference points. You're gonna go through the application process, you're gonna find your hunt code, you're gonna apply in the draw. If you are successful, you get your license. If you're unsuccessful, you get a preference point. Okay? So the more years you apply, and that's in your first choice. I have to be clear that that is your first choice. So if you're unsuccessful in your first choice, you would get that preference point. Okay? So to make this even more complex, you have a total of 4 choices that you can choose. So if you're unsuccessful in your first, you don't get a license, you get a preference point. The draw, and I have a slide later on this, but the draw then goes down to all second choices for that hunt code once it's run through all first choices. Okay? Second, third, and fourth choices do not use preference points. At that point, you still got your preference point on your first choice because you were unsuccessful, and then you can actually draw a license on your second, third, or fourth choice within the draw. Does that answer?
But you don't get a preference choice if you don't get your top 4 choices.
I'm sorry?
If you don't get any of your top 4 choices, do you get a preference point for second, third, and fourth? Or only
No,
for the
you only get 1 preference point per year. Per
So
species.
how have people trying to figure out a way to say this nicely, it'll take me a minute. So what are some challenges, how have you seen, or has there been any gaming of this system, and what does it look like?
Wow. That's a...
Yes.
I need to-
Yes.
Provide a detailed explanation of how that happened.
Or an example, or I just need to, I'm getting a lot of email and just conversations around these preference points, so I just need to, I feel like this is a real important area for us to get understanding.
I'll just give a brief example how and it's not, I won't really call it gaming, but
I don't know.
it is.
Find a nice word.
But I can apply in the draw. And our licenses are set up by list A, B, or C. So as a sports person, you can have 1A, you can have an A and a B, or you can have 2 Bs. And C, you can have...
Let me take a stab at that. I think I'm just worried for time, so I'll answer that directly. Maybe we ought to talk offline, and it's not that Corey's wrong. It's be like the tax code to some degree. There's a way to get deductions within this, so you can get, you can put in for this, and you might draw that, and you could get a license and a point. But there's no way to cheat the system in this one, or there's no jail, there's no IRS jail here, but the system is ironclad. You're not going to get 2 points ever, or you're not going to get extra points. But you can use the system if you understand it to your benefit. But when we start getting into A, B, and C lists, again, we'll be here for hours and hours. And short answer is, there is a way to use the system, if you understand it, to get a little more benefit, but you don't get any more than anybody else. It's just an understanding the system, if that helps. So you can't cheat the system for 2 points on a species. That helps. So.
Can I just say, the way I would say it is, if you master the complexity, you will see opportunity that the average person that doesn't master that complexity, they won't see it. They'll just put in, they don't get what they want, or they do. When you see somebody that's really into this, I mean, they have a strategy before they apply, like Marvin, I'm sure, and then they've got a strategy for the leftover list, and, I mean, it just goes on, and so they're mastering all this complexity. And Corey, just one other thing too, just so Ed's got this, you can apply as your first choice for a preference point, and sometimes people do that. I've done that, because you know you're not going to get, you don't have enough points, so you can start building them up. Another thing too, Corey, just, this was not apparent to me immediately, because I was never a big preference point hunter, but you start building up your preference points, you get like 10 because you're going for a trophy area. You have to be careful how you apply, because you can mistakenly apply into the wrong area and lose all your points that you didn't need to get that elk. So there's a lot of this that you need to master in order to be an effective, be like Luke or Marvin that really understand the system. So
It's very complicated. It's like you can go turkey hunting with Howard in Nebraska, and
get
you
nothing.
can get 3 permits and still have no turkeys.
I don't know. Thank you.
We had a good time.
Pretty much what I did on this slide is the last slide I had. I really just took a scenario and walked through the draw, so I won't go through this too far in detail unless you see something that you had a question on. But this really starts from total quota and then works all the way down through the landowner, youth, hybrid, non-resident cap, and then general public. And then that's how the licenses are drawn out. So, draw order determination for elk, deer, pronghorn, and bear. First it goes by the hunt code. So we're looking at individual hunt code, the choice, the preference points a customer has in descending order, and then the draw number. And I'm going to explain the draw number just so you understand this real quickly. But when you apply, every customer is given a random 6-digit code. You'll see that on here as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When we run the draw, this goes back to Dan's point as far as not being able to beat the system. This was designed to not be beat, in that someone couldn't. I mean, it doesn't matter on whether you apply the first day or the last day. It's really luck of the draw. I'm sorry? That's okay. So again, you applied, you received your original application number. We then invert that number, so we put it backwards. So now your number is 654321. And then we literally have a random draw in our office to where we pull numbers out of a bucket. And this is all certified, documented. But if you look at the conversion table to the right, you'll see 0, 1, it's just in order. And then we draw the numbers out of a hat. We go to the first number, we place the 4, down the line 70369. So now we're going to take your inverted draw number and convert it. So once we convert it based on the conversion table, your draw number now is 296307. And that becomes your final draw number. And I'm going to explain why that's important. Because now we're all, in this, at least at this table, we're all applying for the same hunt code. We all have the exact amount of preference points. That number is how we determine order. Because now you're going to take everyone that has that amount of preference points and then organize them based on that final draw number. And if there's 15 of us and the quota is 10, it'll start from the top and go down 10. And those would be the ones who would draw that license. Okay? And the remaining would get a preference point if it's their first choice. Great, no questions. Moving on.
You skated right through that.
Just go right on.
I have to comment that Mr. Chick has become very comfortable in presenting. I can remember the first time he presented. I mean that as a high compliment, too.
Thank you. Unfortunately, on this slide, it's missing some data, so I'm going to have to jump back to the other one because these, for moose, mountain goat, and Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, actually, and desert sheep, it's totally different. One, desert sheep does not use preference points. The other three use points, but it's a different type of points. It uses both regular points and weighted points. So when you enter into one of these draws, the first 3 years, you'll just get regular points, and you cap at 3. You then move into the weighted point system, which is when you truly first start having a chance statistically to draw. So in this scenario, it goes through exactly what I just explained as far as the application number, to the point that you end up with the final draw number. So then, actually, let me go back. So then now you'll see a line on here where I have calculated application number. So to explain this, my final draw number in this scenario was 296307. So if I have 3 regular points and 15 weighted points, that number would be divided by 15 plus 1. And the reason we always do plus 1 is because the year you have 3 and 0, we don't want to divide your final draw number by 0. So really the first year when you pick up your third point, you really have 3 and 1 as it relates to the draw. And no questions again, moving on.
You went off the question and everything.
I was like, we're in the 201 section, so this is for y'all.
And I'm just going to tell you, my staff are way smarter and understand this much. I mean, a lot of these questions, if y'all call me on, I'm going to let you talk to them because I fight through this a little bit, and I've been in this position for 3 years and have learned a lot of it, but it's complicated. And this shows how complicated it gets. So this is basically a 1-year snapshot of the draw. And you'll see a start date, end date. All that is functions that we have to do to set up to over a week period that is, I'm trying to find it on here. It doesn't really matter, but there's really a period in there that we're pushing a button and running a draw. But there's, I mean, if you look at, I mean, any of these, some like the big game draw prod, I mean, that March, April, May, June, 4 months to complete that section. To really give you, and that's a the top picture of that is really a blown up, very high level view. If you look at more individual tasks, you would go down, and it's even greater than that because the little ticks that you see down at the bottom are the little ticks are anything between 1 and 5 tasks. Those larger slide boxes that's on there can be in the hundreds of tasks that has to be done by staff just to get through that process of this calendar. Where that's important, and I won't harp on it a lot, for instance, November when we have W-2 open, if anything is passed on that date by the commission, that's regulation that y'all would like to have for that year, everything prior to that has to be rechecked. We get to the point that we were, build what you were asking for, and then start testing again. So it's a long process, and that's why a lot of times either Henry, my predecessor, or you'll hear me, that's a great idea. Not sure if we can do it for this year. This is a lot of why. And it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily the vendor, OIT, it's everything built in together. in the complexity of the draw program and our system, in just why some of that is hard to get done in the same year.
What are the financial implications of the increase in the number of applications for your processes? So is there a certain, like, have you had to adjust your processes because of an increase in the number of applications, or have you found that your system has allowed for the increase in applications to continue the process?
So the way we set the application rates for both resident and non-resident was based off, we really took a deep dive into what it cost the agency for that process. And that's where we come up with that number. We didn't want to charge sports people any more than it was costing us to run the draw. So it's really not just them paying for the system, or it's to run the draw from A to Z, which includes the application process.
Thank you.
Again, this is just a high-level overview. This is a lot, or more of one that we give to staff, just so we can explain to customers how different, or the timing of what we do within the year within the draw, and it's also by species. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to let me know.
Corey, I have, through the magic of modern technology, I have a question for you. So, and of course I can answer it, but I think we might as well have it for everybody. Does a license go specifically with a person at all times? For example, if I draw a license and I'm unable to hunt, can I give it to someone else? Can I go hunt with someone else and have another person take the shot?
Okay.
So why don't you answer those two?
I can, and it's probably more of a law enforcement question, but luckily, coming from the field, it's easy enough to answer that when you are in the field, you're supposed to have your license on your person. No, there is no transfer. So you cannot have your license, transfer it just to anyone. We do have some accommodations. They're not for shooting. It's more for tracking and any follow-up. So we do allow some of that, but not to the level that the question was asked.
And Commissioner Hauser also asked if everybody could use the microphones because he's reporting in that it's hard to hear, so.
Okay.
Thank you, Corey.
So the numbers that we've been talking about for this year's application process, it's a lot of the numbers on a page. I will send out the entire list or page to the commission, but I really, for the sake of the discussion today, really wanted to break down, and I do have a summary page that's a lot easier to digest, but I really just wanted to break down two species, both deer and moose, just to show y'all some of the difference. But I have it broken out by resident, non-resident, and adult youth. And I also did it, or we did it by, we wanted to compare 2017 to 18 and 2017 to 2019. So that encompasses a lot of changes that we've had over the last 3 years. Just for the sake of the discussion, in 2017, we still had paper applications. We had a $3 application fee, and we paid up front before we drew, okay? So in 2018, it was the year we went live with IPAWS, and quite a bit of that changed. We did away with paper applications. There was only a $3 application fee, and you did not pay up front. You paid if you drew. So taking that into account, and we can start talking about these numbers, if we look at deer, non-resident, in 2017, and I'm just going to, for the sake of time, go to the totals, we had 63,402 non-resident applicants for deer. In 2018, when we made the change and went live with IPAWS, that number jumped up to 84,868, which was a 34% increase in applications. If we compare, then if we look at the changes that were made in November last year, that would impact application numbers. So Actually, it's not just November, because it's also with the fee bill. So the increase in license fee, if you also look at the application rate going from $3 to $7 and $9, and then also the qualifying license. 2019's application rate for deer non-resident lowered to 73,867. So the difference between 17 to 19 is still a 17% increase in what we saw in 2017. But if we compare 2018, last year, to this year, we had a 13% decrease compared to last year.
Question going forward is, will that continue? Or will people get used to the qualifying license and the extra fee and go back to?
It's a hard question to answer as far, I mean, the hardest part of having any of these discussions is be able to anticipate behavior of the customer. No different than whether you're talking preference points or creep or any of that. It's really a conversation about what they're doing. It'll be easier, well, yeah, it'll be easier to look at the overall and have some of those discussions. So on this slide, excuse me, so I have all species. And then, so if we go back to 2017, which is more of a historic level, we had 518,000-ish applications. In 2018, after we made the changes, went live, 689,463, which was overall 33% increase in applications. And you'll see some of them as high as 176, 135%. Sorry.
But the valid comparison is 17 to 19, because 2018 was that strange deal with.
That's correct. And sorry.
A, can we do you mind leaning into the microphone? And B, what was the strange thing? Can you just talk about what happened in 2018? I don't know what
I
happened.
didn't explain the strange thing that happened, that we created.
The strange thing.
Here, I'll take a shot at it. I know it. So what we're saying is, we had, through a combination of the statutory environment and where our IT provider was, a year where we shifted off of making everyone pay up front. So you would write a check for thousands of dollars because of goats and sheep. And then in the old days, when you didn't draw the tag, it would all get refunded. So it's extremely inefficient. So we shifted that year and dropped and said, okay, you only have to pay if you are awarded a tag, which took a barrier away, and we saw a huge jump in application numbers. So then, because the fee bill did go through, and then we had the authority then to start meddling with things, we put in a series of steps last year, the qualifying license, which affects elk, deer, and I know you guys have seen a lot of this email, but also then for the big three, we also put in a preference point fee. And so that leads to what I was going to comment on. It looks like the preference point fee was very effective on the big three, right? Because the qualifying license is changed your numbers on elk and deer, but not near to the level that you see on the big three. So is that right, Corey? Am I overreading it?
And I'm looking at some of the numbers. I mean, and they're considerably higher. If you look at moose, I mean, we had between 18 and 19, a 31%, basically, yeah, a 31% decrease in application rates. It would, and it does. I mean, there's different things, I mean, tools that y'all have in your tool case. I think it did have a larger impact, and I think it would have gotten, and I'm not advocating for this, because there's just, I mean, understanding those tools. The opt-in, opt-out, if that wouldn't have been part of that option, it would have shot even further. So allowing folks now to apply in the draw and opt out of the preference point, paying for it, and just staying at the level they currently are at right now.
What we don't capture here is the dollars, i.e., we'll never be able to capture what we made on the qualifying licenses, because we'll never know. People didn't say, oh, I bought the small game because, right? And so there's no real way to identify what we did in terms of dollars. I mean, we know what we did with the $7 to $9 based on the number of applications, et cetera, but that doesn't change the number of licenses that are purchased. The licenses are purchased if you get the draw, right? I mean, for these non-residents. And so that's a whole different picture that we can never go into. But to try to analyze where we ended up financially as a result of what we did just last year, we can guess, but we can never nail that number down. Is that fair?
It's definitely, I mean, I play with license numbers, I would have to.
Yeah, Justin Ruther, him and I were just talking. We actually can track that year to year, and we can probably get pretty close to it. So we'll be able to see some of those trends over time, especially with small game combo licenses. And so actually, I think we will be able to show differences in previous years as to how we move forward in the future with the total numbers of those licenses being sold.
Good.
I've toyed with it a little bit, looking at numbers, and ran a report from the start of the application period to the end for last year and this year. And our license sales are very considerably higher for this year, for small game fishing. So I mean, considerably higher. So, last thing I wanted to touch on, unless there's any further questions, was actually a question, Commissioner Vigil, that you had yesterday, and I wanted to explain moose, especially when you're in a float group. So a float group may have numerous hunt codes, numerous methods of take, but because they fall within that total quota. So just an example, we'll just take any three methods of take and just say the quota is 300. So any of us can apply in the draw using one of those hunt codes. And then what it's going to do is it's going to, based on all that conversion, inversion, it's going to run everything through, and it's just going to spit out a list of customers in their draw order by that conversion that we did. And then if the quota is 300, it's going to take the first 300, and then it goes to those customers and grabs the hunt code, and that's how we issue the license. So it comes out of that float quota, if that makes sense. So then, because we're just looking at the 300, and they have the ability to transfer seasons as long as they let us know prior to the season starts, it really doesn't matter, and it's not affecting anything. They can just transfer that and go archery hunting instead of the muzzleloader that they chose.
Corey, just one thing on here that I think is kind of a complication that comes up is, group hunting. Can you just touch on that for a second? You don't have to go too much detail, but I'm sure there's 4 of us, we're in Oklahoma. We all want to come to Colorado, hunt this together. How do we accomplish that with this huge, complex preference point system?
And it shouldn't take too long. And the nice thing is the system is set up to allow for group applications. So to go to your scenario, there's 4 of you. If you're the group leader, you would go on and apply first. You have 5 points. Your 3 partners are then going to go in. They can apply. They have to apply for the same hunt code, or the only difference can be the sex of the animal can be different, but it has to be the same hunt, basically. So then they're going to go and apply. We'll say they're all setting at 3 points. So you apply, and then now it's time for the draw. So when we run a group through the draw, we always use the least amount of points. So if you have someone with 15, 10, 9, 2, you're going to enter into the draw for that hunt code with 2 preference points.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so how's everybody doing?
Commissioners, do you want to go to, we're scheduled to go to 12. We could go to 12:30, or we could just go to 12, and then we've got a list of items that staff can take up for future days. What, is there a preference, or?
Well,
Oh, I thought,
I think they're getting overloaded.
it says 12:30.
Does it say 12:30?
Yeah, the original agenda said 12:30, but we can do
Oh.
whichever.
You did good.
Sorry, I thought that's what you were
There's
asking.
two different, yeah, that's where I was going.
Sorry.
We've had two different times, 12 or 12:30, so it's your choice.
So Commissioners, do you want to go to 12 or 12:30?
It's more so just because.
Well,
Let's go to 12 then, Reed, and then you guys will have a good list of things to follow up with.
Okay, I think we can bring this thing in for a landing here. So what I'll do is we'll have Brad Banuelos present one last piece of information and kind of explain what all these bones and pieces, parts are here in front of you. That's part of your discussion, right? And that cool display of bighorn sheep heads in that case there. We'll work through some of that, and then we'll obviously have plenty to work on in the next meetings or whenever you guys want to. I will continue to offer up that all of this information is highly technical, and we'd be more than willing to offer additional time at 6060 or wherever, a central location to go even deeper if you guys would want to. So, Brad?
Thank you, I appreciate that, and again, I would love us to explore virtual options, because again, we're all over the state, so although I appreciate in-person, because it's not hard for me, but for some of us outside, it would be great if there were virtual options. Thank you.
Yeah, and virtual is definitely something we could do.
Where's my application?
All right. Thank you. My name is Brad Banuelos. I'm a terrestrial biologist, wildlife biologist out of Montrose, Colorado. I'm going to try to keep this actually fairly light and just give you more of an idea on the data that we collect as biologists, as district wildlife managers, who are all biologists as well, and even our customer service representatives, our CSRs, all the data that we collect throughout the year. So Corey has talked about the license numbers, where we're just at. In May, you got to approve license numbers. You kind of got the end product of our annual cycle of management, all the license numbers that we've been talking about. Shannon got to introduce you to herd management plans and that whole aspect of where we sit, where we're going with our big game populations. And this kind of sets us up for the annual cycle of management, or our kind of management by objective process. Let's see, do we have that is, okay. But so conducting hunting seasons, this is where we're going now. Where we started is in the bottom left corner. That's where we're at right now. We just set the harvest goals, the hunting regulations, all that stuff's been set now. So now we're going to be waiting. We're going to be we're going through the process right now of allocating out licenses, and then we'll be conducting the hunting seasons in the fall. So starting from August through December, essentially, is when the majority of our hunting seasons will be conducted. And then we'll move into the part where really this is where a lot of kind of my busy season really kicks in as a big game biologist primarily, is in the winter, collecting data on our big game populations. So we've now conducted our hunting seasons. We need to get information on harvest, what we harvested through our populations around the state. We also need to collect information, population demographic information. Essentially, how many females, males, young are on the landscape, as well as maybe what that survival information is being. So that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about, but just kind of continue through. After we collect all that information, we also need to assess our population. We need to see where we're at and compare back to those herd management plan objectives. And then we go right back into setting our license numbers to achieve those goals, and we're right back into May again. So like I said, primarily we're going to collect this data. This is where we're going to start right now, is collecting data from, really we start collecting our harvest data as soon as the hunting season is done. We actually start contacting hunters right then. So we'll just kind of try to move through some of this stuff. So how do we collect harvest data? We've got two primary methods. One is our big game harvest survey. Actually, Julie can go ahead and hand out a little harvest survey form for you. So I'll come back to that here, but last year we issued, for 2019, I think we issued over, 2018, I guess was here, over 330,000 licenses. We need to get information from all those license holders on what was harvested. Well, we can't contact all of those people. We can't contact them in the field, that's for sure. So we're really trying to get a response of about 70 to 90,000 of those deer, elk, pronghorn license hunters to try to get an idea. Did they hunt? So the 5 questions that are on this card. Did they hunt? Were they successful? Did they actually harvest a deer, harvest a buck, harvest whatever? What date did they do it? Kind of give it as an indication. I mean, how hard was that hunt? Did they have to spend all 5 days or all 9 days to hunt? Or, was it all in the first day? It gives us an idea kind of on effort and maybe what it's taking. In addition, we also we've collected some information generally just about, did they feel crowded? Or what was the quality of their hunt? Because those all play into, kind of gauges for different populations and how we may manage those based on the herd management plan objectives. I have E20, the Uncompahgre elk herd management elk herd in southwestern Colorado. We've got split management. This just makes it super complex, but essentially we've got over-the-counter opportunity. We manage for opportunity on one side of the hill, the other side of the unit, it's managed for quality opportunity. Well, we want to be able to gauge what people are seeing and experiencing. So we want to know if we're being effective in how we're managing the population and what the public requested. But in addition to, oh, sure.
Have you ever thought of making the survey mandatory?
That's where we're going.
Okay.
Great setup. So mandatory check. Well, yeah, I mean, so some states do actually mandatory check on all the, any deer animal that's harvested. It's super difficult. So we issued 330,000 licenses last year. With that, and one thing I didn't mention, to get that sample from the email, internet survey, we actually contacted roughly 176,000 of those people to get an idea. Well, the reason we do that, especially on deer, elk, and pronghorn, is because we harvest so many animals that what we get is we're actually able to get a compliance rate. We're able to see how many people are responding to us. We know how many people hunted, and we have that information. Other states, they do mandatory, but they have no idea what kind of compliance rate they have. So we may issue 330,000 licenses. They may get a report from so many hunters, but we don't know how many people aren't reporting that they actually harvested. So all they really end up with is a bare minimum harvest estimate, and not really, and it may not fully reflect actually what was harvested in those populations. So we do mandatory harvest on a variety of species, including our desert sheep, kind of the big 3 we were talking about earlier, but including desert sheep, Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, moose, also mountain goats, and then we do bear and lion as well through a mandatory check. We collect harvest information here for a variety of biological information. So we've kind of got a variety of bighorns here that we can talk about. We'll go through this a little bit if you want to see, but we do have some check forms as well. And so this is something that, everybody in our age, or at least a lot of people throughout the area offices, are helping to collect this information. So these animals that are being brought in, here's a picture of a bighorn sheep. Our admins at the front desk are helping to collect some of this information. Our temporaries are helping to collect this information. Our district wildlife managers are getting contacted by the hunters to check this out in the field, as well as the biologists. So a ton of people are helping this. Last year we checked over 2,300 animals throughout our offices. It gets really time intensive to actually do it just for these species. But do we want to kind of show for bighorn sheep some of the information that we collect? We're trying to look at age. So with the bighorn sheep, you can actually look at rings. We can hand some of those around. But with bighorn sheep, they put on these growth rings, and essentially, and of course, it gets really it blows my mind when I started looking at desert sheep too, because it kind of goes a little different. But these heavier lines on bighorn sheep indicate kind of that winter stress period, and that indicates when essentially the growth goes down, gets compressed because of winter stress, and that shows us a year. That allows us to indicate how old these different bighorns may be. And that plays into some of our management. Julie will talk about this a little more, but with some of our information, primarily for deer and elk populations, we really look at overall population estimate, and we look at age and sex ratios a lot, or primarily sex ratios. With bighorn sheep, mountain goats, some of these smaller smaller populations, we're looking more maybe at age of the animal that's harvested, or the curl of the animal that's harvested. I mean, there's a whole variety of things out there from, that have been calculated to actually score animals. We don't manage it to that level. Other states do. I was Desert Bighorn Council meeting, and it's interesting, all the other states are presenting what their Boone and Crockett scores are of bighorn sheep. And we don't go to that extent, but we're trying to manage for maybe in different populations, like this animal being a 3/4 curl bighorn sheep. The display in front here also shows different curls of rams and different ages of ram that we can associate. But when we do this process, I mean, we're taking measurements on them. We're looking at basal measurements. A variety of information that we'll collect for bighorns, including that. Okay, when did they, or if they harvested, where did they harvest? We're actually looking at drainage of where they harvest. We're collecting information as well on maybe what else they saw. With bighorn sheep, these populations are small. They're in extremely remote areas. We don't have the resources to do real thorough surveys for all of these populations. So hunters actually provide a great tool to us in that they're out there on the ground, they're scouting through the summer. This is a hunt of a lifetime for most people. So they're scouting through the summer, they've got a 30-day season, they're spending 30 days, they're seeing a lot on the ground. So they provide us a lot of information on maybe what they saw for just the variety of rams that they saw total, to maybe they happen to see a coughing animal. That's helpful information for us when we're looking at disease management. Or they're also giving us information on what they saw for lambs on the ground. For some of these areas, that's some of the best information we have available. In addition, I mean, I talked a lot about bighorn sheep, but we do also collect for like bears and lions. Yeah, we also collect. We will pull a tooth from bear and lion skulls to get at age. You can actually cut the tooth in half and just age it just like tree rings to look at cementum age. You can even so we get that information, that we look retrospectively to kind of manage age of or animals on the landscape and how old that population may be. The other things that we do too, I mean, we're collecting a ton of biological information, but there's also a little information that helps us to get a feel for and kind of to make that mandatory is for bighorn sheep, we put in plugs. That left horn, on the back side of that left horn is a plug that actually goes in there, and that we drill into the horn and glue in place. And part of what that does is, one, it has to be plugged to collect if you harvest a ram in Colorado. It shows that it was checked at our office. And then for some reason, if you did ever want to sell it or give it to somebody else, there's proof that it actually has been checked in our office. But again, it's just another thing to help us make sure that we're getting all the information that we want, and we know exactly how many bighorn sheep are being harvested. In addition, with bears and lions, we also put a seal on them. You'll hear people talk about that. There's some yellow and silver aluminum tags, and essentially when a bear or lion is harvested in our office, they have to get that seal. They have to have that seal before they go to a tannery.
And a bobcat too, right?
And bobcat as well, yep.
So I just want to add a couple other things to this. from a law enforcement perspective, we're also collecting information on all these things as well. And whether it's mandatory or not, a lot of the other information we get is DNA information. We have a DNA warehouse, if you will, with the state of Wyoming that's helped us out. And we've collected enough DNA information on all of our different big game species and small game stuff that we've collected a lot of those things. The other thing too is oftentimes we'll do check stations. And so officers and biologists will go out in the field and essentially we're talking to all the hunters coming out of the forest or whatever, we're checking, and a lot of that helps us from a biological perspective and also a law enforcement perspective. So there is kind of a commingling of some of that utility there.
This is completely off point, just kind of curious. Did you stop the grouse buckets?
Wing barrels?
Yeah, we did. We use those things for different reasons, for biological reasons, and so sometimes if we have a research project going on or we want to get information locally about things, we may institute like wing buckets or different things like that, but as of right now, we don't have those implemented right now. But if a project arose that we wanted to do that, we could try and implement those kind of things.
So these are primarily the two methods that we do to collect our harvest data after we've implemented our hunting seasons. But how do we collect this population demographic data? So what I mean by population demographic data is essentially just, how many females are on the landscape? How many males are on the landscape? How many young are on the landscape? So we talk about that, and like Sharon talked earlier, and Matt showed in our tables, our herd management plans really rely on that sex ratios, primarily in our deer elk, somewhat in, I think, in our pronghorn plans as well. And we're trying to gauge that with our deer plans, at least as an example. I mean, if we really want to offer up a lot of hunting opportunity, in a population, we'll manage for a lower sex ratio, manage for 20 bucks per 100 does, but we can offer a lot of hunting opportunity. Or if we want to manage for really quality animals, you're going to have to do that. You're really going to have to reduce your opportunity, but you can manage for that higher sex ratio objective. Age ratio, this age ratio idea is our young to adult females. This is an index really for, on that specific year, what's the survival of young up until December when we do most of our flying, and gives us an idea of what the productivity of the population is on a yearly basis. Then one other thing that we'll collect too is survival data. For some of our populations, we're able to use collar data, put out capture animals, put out collars, and we can actually look at survival. I'm going to talk about all these a little more here in just a sec. But how do we?
2 minutes until 12.
Hey, what's that?
There's 2 minutes until 12. Yeah, Brad, I was going to say you've got 1 minute.
Okay, gotcha. All right, well, we'll cruise through here. So to collect this data, let's see, there's a little video here. I'm not sure. I think I can do it. It won't let me select it.
Go to the video.
Well, essentially, it's a video, and we've got these videos online as well. There's a video that Darby Finley, one of our terrestrial biologists out of the Northwest, showed that really kind of describes this process of collecting classification data. But what it is, I mean, like I said, like we're flying in a helicopter or maybe a fixed wing plane to do pronghorn, and we're trying to look at males and females that are on the landscape and to give us that annual, yearly data collection point to play into our whole process for license allocation essentially in the next year. And when we talk about, we're doing some people will say that we're doing counts. When we're flying, we're not counting everything that's on the landscape. We don't have the financial resources or the time to fly every square mile of Colorado to get at how many animals are on the landscape. So we're really just flying concentration areas to get as much information as we can. This just kind of shows survival data. And we can, if people want to look at any of this stuff later. I've actually got a couple of collars up here, one of which was actually just pulled off of Commissioner Bray's property last week. One of our deer that we trapped for our Uncompahgre mule deer monitoring study, we trapped in the town of Nucla within D19, Uncompahgre Plateau. and that animal started to migrate and went across Commissioner Bray's property, heading south, maybe towards Telluride. I'm not sure where exactly it was going, but it got whacked by a lion along the way. And this collar here, this black collar that's up front, if you come and take a look at, is a GPS collar. So that collar, I was able to get that information the day after it died. I got a text saying, hey, this thing's on mortality. We were able to get our district wildlife manager, Tony Bonaquista, was able to go out the next day and say, oh yeah, this was definitely a lion kill. So this is a variety of information that we're trying to collect around the state on survival data. And there's a few different things that we can do to collect population estimates, just point estimates in a given population. Be happy to talk about some of this stuff more in the future as well. People want to call, give a call. Our biologists do a variety of things from distance sampling techniques, marker site, quadrat surveys. There's a whole slew of things that we do to try to get the best information available on what our population estimate is, because that, again, is all playing back into our herd management plans and how we allocate licenses on a given year. Our primary tool is population models, computer-generated models. This graph here just illustrates our Uncompahgre gray elk population since 1980.
Brad?
Yep.
I think we got to finish it up.
We're at time.
No problem.
You can close up if you got just a minute.
So all this was kind of coming back to, after we collect our population data, all our harvest data, our survival data, all of this goes into the computer model. And these blue lines up on the table, up on the graph up there, illustrate our population objective range and tells us, okay, are we within objective? Where do we want to go for the next year? And that would set it up for the future on talking about harvest strategies and goals for the upcoming year.
Thank you, Brad. Reed, thanks very much. And I think you guys we obviously didn't get through everything, but it's good, to set up another conversation. So that's great. I have a couple of just very fast administrative things. These are the last things I do. The first thing is I just wanted to thank a couple of people on staff. I particularly want to thank policy and planning. I don't think anybody got pushed by me more than the policy and planning group. And I know I was pretty demanding on our two forums, and I just want to thank you. I think you guys are a big part of the future of the agency, and I really enjoyed working with you. I also want to just thank all the district wildlife managers, the rangers, all the experts, the researchers, Dr. Miller, everyone behind the counters. I really, really enjoyed working with all of you. And for senior staff, I got to spend a lot of time with you, but for each and every person behind the counter, I remember those interactions. They're really important. So, for the management team, I just want to thank you a lot. You're really professional, and you're really focused on leadership, and that's what I look for in an organization. People that lead from the front. It's just been a great experience for me. So my last thing that I need to do is hand over the gavel to acting chair now, Zimmerman. And I just want to make one last notation for the record. The last time I do it, I just want to congratulate you because you're the first woman chair of the modern Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. And it's a great pleasure to congratulate you.
Before you gavel me or Chairman, ex-Chairman Howard, there might be,
Yeah, I'd like to.
yeah, I think, so I'll just tee it off real quick. So Chairman Howard doesn't know that's coming, but we'll figure out a time, excuse me, I'm a little close for this, so I might have to talk him into Telluride or, well, we're not going to Meeker now, so Rifle, or we'll pick his favorite time to have a celebration of his leadership on the time on the commission, as he will be departing, and we will miss his wisdom and insight. He's been a fantastic chairman, but we'll have time to talk about that and think about that at one of our next meetings, because that's really important. We thought about Jeff and I sat down and talked about this briefly, and we thought, we could do something here, but he's still on the commission, and we're happy about that. You never know what happens in the next couple of days, so, he might have some words of wisdom for all of us, but expect that as in the future. And so I do want to open it up, and obviously so does Chairwoman Zimmerman to the commission here, but you will get another opportunity. So I just want to tell John thanks. He and I have spent a fair amount of time in a duck blind. He's pushed me on a few things. I don't know if I ever pushed back, but we'll talk about that later, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I do look forward to roasting John a little in the future. I got only one or two stories, but I do want to make, I've been on the commission now almost 12 years. Went through a lot of chairmen. And there's good chairmen, there's excellent chairmen. There are exceptional chairmen. And John is the only one that I would rate in that category that I've served with. I mean, he's above and beyond. His dedication, his work ethic, his openness to all is unsurpassed. Just fantastic.
Agreed.
Thank you. I can agree with what Commissioner Bray said. I've been to meetings on and off for many, many years, and I've only been on the commission for a little while, but John is the best chairman I have ever seen running a meeting. In times like the last meeting, the Bobcat, he ran it really well, kept us on schedule. But the biggest thing is he would call me and say, what are your questions, what are your concerns? Kind of took me under his wing, and that meant a lot. So you will be missed.
That also goes for me, John. I have a lot of acquaintances, but you have become a friend. I really appreciate it. And I don't pick friends.
Thank you, Jim.
Commissioner Garcia.
I'll save most of mine for the roast. But I do want to say that you were the one person I've ever seen who really made me feel at home. When you said to me, this is not a commission, this is a family.
While I'm a new commissioner, I have followed the commission closely over the years, as served in the Habitat Stem Committee, and personally, as a sportsman and conservationist, I'm just so appreciative of your leadership on this commission over the last years. Certainly, as with controversial issues and being able to serve here, and particularly watch you just the last 3 meetings, it has been a wonderful learning experience, and hopefully, I will be able to imbue some of those things as I move forward.
So I was not aware that this was your last meeting until like 30 minutes ago. So I am sitting here just like blindsided. In the short tenure that I've been on the commission, I have just found you to be incredibly supportive, modeling and echoing on piggybacking on what others said about the facilitation skills are so strong, the organizational skills are so strong, your ability to deal with contentious issues with such grace and humility is just wonderful to witness. And I have been involved, although I've only been here for 3 months, I have been involved in and seen some amazing facilitation. And I would agree with Commissioner Bray that yours is exceptional. So thank you for modeling that. Thank you for raising the bar. And thank you for challenging us all to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of what ideas they have or expectations or experiences. So thank you.
Well, like Commissioner Garcia, I'll save my roasting for a different event. I didn't know what to expect when I came on the commission. And, everyone has such different, skills and strengths they bring, and, the chairperson, I think, is really responsible for bringing that out and having an atmosphere of inclusivity. And you really embody that, John. And you really made me feel welcome, and you really made me feel like family. Thank you.
I'll just add, Commissioner, Chairman, ex-chairman, when you get your, the ex-chairman home on top of Crazy French. I've seen a lot of chairmen, as Commissioner Bryce said, and you certainly raised the bar and pulled this commission together, pulled this agency together in a way I've not seen before, and I only hope I can bring you near to holding that standard, and I would hope all of you help me reach that standard. You can bet I'll be calling you frequently. Thank you.
Thank you.
You as the acting.
I think you need a motion for that. I checked on it.
Yeah.
Just automatically goes.
Well, I would make a suggestion that Marvin become the acting vice chair, and I will stay on as secretary until November.
So just for clarity, typically the election of officers happens in November, so that's why we're acting, using the acting title.
Did you ask Marvin?
No. He's younger than me, I don't have to ask him.
He didn't really ask me. He told me. I didn't anticipate. Well, I did anticipate doing and being on the commission in my retirement. I didn't anticipate doing something like this. If it's helpful and the fellow commissioners support it, I'd be, happy to do it. As you guys all see, I'm pretty passionate about wildlife here in Colorado. So for the short term or whatever acting, I'd be happy to do it if everyone wants me to, and the agency and the leadership also want me to.
You're done.
Okay, well, with that,